Good evening and welcome to the Fort Smith City Board of Directors study session on this February the 11th of 2025. The meeting is called to order. At this time we will go to the first item on the agenda, which is a review, renewal of the city's auto and property insurance. Director Good, you're going to take care of that. Who's going to speak to that?
We'll start this evening with Andy Richards, our Chief Financial Officer, to introduce this item.
Our property and auto insurance policy is going to expire at the end of this month, and we need a renewal. So we brought this to you on study session so we can go over the changes in the premiums and things. I do have Philip Mary here, that's been consulting with us and working through the renewal process. We should have someone online too. We have Denise Engel from Gallagher that works with Philip and with us, the city, to answer any questions you have. But I'm going to turn over to Philip and let him make a little quick presentation about the insurance premiums and policies coming up.
Mr. Murray, you recognize.
Before I go any further, I would sure like to, if I could, please pay a real tribute to Andrew Richards, your Chief Financial Officer, keeping up with all your funding, your money, and whatnot. And he's also totally integrated into the purchasing department, and they're look for their new leader and whatnot, working both ways. Very quick study, I might add. The insurance industry paid out last year due to natural disasters. There was $417 billion of claims in the United States in 2024. The causes range from climate change or from whatever weather patterns are happening. There's fires, there's El Nino, there's wind and hail. We're in the middle of Tornado Alley. There's hurricanes, ice storms. The weather patterns are crazy. McDonald's Corporation, everybody is seeing increases. The carriers are seeing premiums double and tripled with claims paid out, and they just can't do it any longer. AML has done a heck of a job stabilizing in the middle of a really hard market. Their premium is up this year. But I will bring to you, I hope to present to you reasons that you will agree are reasons that we should still be very thankful for what they're doing. The premiums last year for auto were $774,694, and this year will be $791,077, slightly up. And the $791 does include a surcharge. Loss ratio. Premiums paid into the system, dollars paid out, how do they compare on a percentage basis? The auto, it's got an increase in here of where the rates are one thing, and then they surcharge up higher to something that helps them think they might break even. On property, $1.1 million last year. This year it'll be north of 1.6. Over a $500,000 increase. And I will tell you that they are continuing to hold at the $10,000 deductible on a per occurrence basis, not per building, and that is key. Other markets that we're aware of, Denise, she would be here, but weather prohibits from Oak City. Ice is getting ready to happen. The premiums are way outcharged by the losses, and they cannot continue to operate at a deficit. AML is not so much an insurance company as it is a risk spreading pool across the state of 496 cities. And that is part of their dynamic and their personality to keep the deductibles low. So they are doing that on the property. The rate for property is gone from 26 cents per 100 of value to 31 cents. That is the same rate for Fayetteville, North Little Rock, Forest City, same rate for everybody. Same deductible, $10,000 per occurrence for everybody. The property has a slight stinger to it as well for loss ratio. Our premiums are well exceeded by our losses. We did a study and found that since 2016, just south of $16 million has been paid out in losses to the city of Fort Smith. Their premiums are nowhere near even half that for the same time frame. That's okay. It's risk spreading. So I wanted to share with you that we believe that you should renew with AML, Liberty Mutual, Travelers, Chubb, all the ones we talked to. That they said, Philip, Denise, this is not the year to take our file to market. You've got a 283% loss ratio in auto, a 236% loss ratio in property. Us underwriters, we go to coffee and we talk, and we have long memories. Don't put that out in the market right now. But if you do, you're going to see no less than $100,000 deductible for fire and such, and you'll see no less than a 2% wind and hail deductible. 2% of $500 million is, what, 100,000, maybe $1 million. So this was not the time to do it. We can't, as long as $10,000 deductible per occurrence is available to you. We know it's not available in the open private market. We know that the autos are going to get a change. April 23, 2 years ago, hailstorm hit, 50 cars, 50 autos, $1,000 deductible, total per occurrence. One deductible. That has changed. AML has said enough's enough. We're going to go $1,000 deductible per vehicle that is damaged. So 50 cars, that'd be 51,000 deductibles. So from a risk management standpoint, talk to the chief. Whenever he sees bad weather coming, he tries his best to get his autos over underneath the covered parking deck. But we might get the word out to sanitation everywhere. Spread your cars out. Don't bunch them up. Because we're going to have a deductible every single unit. Something to think about. In our view, AML is cost effective. At this time, you cannot match the premium for the coverage provided. They are consistent, transfer of losses at a low deductible, reinsured and supported by other communities in risk spreading. Rates are reflective of losses, but do not assume all of the losses occur in the same year, because sometimes it takes over a year or two to pay them out. The city has the option to include or exclude equipment from its schedule, and this is unique. Limitations are we must do more hands-on in our claims handling, and we have to manually add and delete vehicles all the time. There's no blanket automatic. But by and large, AML is providing a market that it is fair that they surcharge when we've had claims way exceed premiums. And other carriers do it. And someday I look forward to when AML can give you a credit if you didn't have claims and a debit if you do. But this is a start. Denise recommends that you go with AML for property and liability. Yes, it's a total spend of 1.9 to 2.4. Your chief financial officer says that it will be spread among departments. It will be cost allocated. They will have a way to meet the need. We've been looking at things, what should we cover? What should we not cover? In the statement of values, where you total up your limit, we're looking at things we might not need to cover, or should we just cover part of them? And I can get into specifics on that if you like, but we're trying to, whatever we buy insurance on, it makes sense that we do it, but where we might, the odds of it getting hurt are remote, let's don't insure it. That's how we can keep lowering the price. There's a city in Fort Smith, in Oklahoma, similar to the size of Fort Smith. They pay 26 cents. They have a $100,000 deductible. They have a 2% wind and hail deductible. And they're proud of their rate. They went looking for a deductible buy-down, it's called, where these carriers are all bunched in at 100. There's a market where you can go buy insurance where they'll jump in and pay your deductible. The cost for that is just wildly insane. So As long as the 10,000 is available to you and you're in this risk-spreading mechanism, Denise and I recommend to Andy and to you all that you stay with AML at the prices I think that were outlined in his submittal for the internet over the weekend. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions from the board?
No, I have one there.
Yes.
Go ahead, Neil.
Go ahead.
I'll go next.
Mr. Mary, you talked about looking at things we should and shouldn't cover. Like, as we go into 2025, and we were looking at 2025, what are some things that we should be looking at as potentially not covering?
I'm not saying we should not cover it, but we're studying it.
Right.
We're in a study right now.
Right.
And when you have a thing called spread of risk, think of a tornado. They're categories 1, 2, and 3. They're pointers. They point at the bottom. They dance around. A wall cloud is a category 5, and it's like a curtain that's going around and scraping everything. Traffic lights. A particular intersection could get hurt. But on a pointer, it would be just one area, one intersection. A wall cloud, it might be multiple intersections. So we're looking at what's the total value for all the stoplights in the whole city and looking at what that value is, looking at 31 cents per 100 of that as a premium spend, and then compare that to the likelihood of a loss. If you had a $100,000 deductible, self-insuring a lot of the stoplights makes sense. If it's a $10,000 deductible, then now we're asking, what if a car hits it? That's a singular thing. What if there's vandalism? That's a singular thing. But if it's a tornado, is it a pointer or is it a wall cloud? So things like that we're studying.
Okay. And when do you think you guys would be complete with that study?
We can give you recommendation on that next Tuesday when you vote.
Okay.
Yep.
I think that'd be interesting to see. Maybe we use that kind of as a planning guide for us as we go into 25 and then budget for 26, those types of things.
It's there's pros and cons to that. I mean, traffic department might not like that idea, so,
Right.
We got to be sensitive to the needs of all.
Right.
But 31 cents, whatever the hundreds of millions or whatever they cost, times 31 cents, well, that's a number. Then we got to look at the propensity that that's going to happen or not. And if it did, thank the Lord, it's only $10,000 deductible. So because the deductible's low, that might warrant bringing it on back in.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Director George Cassatt.
Andy, how are we going to absorb this $500,000? The increase? Or
The $500,000 increase.
Yeah, how are we going to absorb that?
Well, we did budget for a premium increase during the 25 budget process. We didn't budget quite this much, so there might be some adjustment, but it's allocated among all the departments, across the city-wide. So we're going to absorb it everywhere, pretty much. But, I think we're still getting the calculations because we just got the values per asset, the premiums just this week. So we're figuring out what the allocations are, but we may have to adjust the budget citywide by maybe $200,000 for the premium.
Yeah.
Like I said, that's going to be across.
Does the general fund contribute to the insurance payments?
Oh, sure. Yeah, because, you've got
Streets, utilities,
police vehicles, buildings. We'll have to add 623 Garrison as well. So that'll be another increase. But once we get that done and, determine what the replacement value is, we'll add it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Director Settle.
I want to thank Mr. Mary for all the hard work you did. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your work with them because it helps big time. Mr. Dingman, one suggestion Denise and I would offer to the group to consider bit now is maybe do another study once again on flood. The flood insurance of the AML offering is rather limited, and it's kind of a low limit that must be shared through all cities in the state. Kind of a first one to need it gets it. So at some point, sir, we offer to do a study for you for the National Flood Insurance Program, keeping in mind what we would be willing to do to help you with FEMA, stuff like that, if that ever happens again.
I think Director Kemp.
Do what, sir?
Director Kemp.
Yes. I just really wanted to ask maybe administration a question on this too. How many of our departments have coverings for, like, I know our city buses, when I went out and met with Ken Savage, you know, they can park under a covering, which can help with the idea of loss from hail damage and things of that nature. Do other departments have those sort of opportunities, and do we have ways to maybe look at exploring covering vehicles? And then for one final part of this that's on my mind as I've thought about this was, and I'm going to plead ignorance here, that I don't know how often the parking garage downtown is utilized, but I'm just wondering, you know, opportunities to utilize this to protect ourselves from loss, and I don't know, you know, vehicles going home, if they're under a carport. Those are just some questions that I had as far as if we could get, you know, how many of our vehicles have a covering for night?
Aside from what you've noticed in transit, not very many. You know, a lot of our vehicles, particularly you drive by the yard at 3900 Kelly Highway, you'll see a lot of them. I mean, they are in the open for the most part, and that's just, I mean, it costs money to put them all under cover. But your point is well taken. I mean, and all of the departments know when weather's coming. Like Mr. Murray mentioned, I mean, they will take them to the garage. Of course, at that point, everybody in town knows the weather's coming, so they're all sort of fighting for that space. But it is a real thing.
So then at a practical point, is there anything to explore of, when we talk about spreading out assets, should we look at allowing city workers to take their vehicles home?
I will say that one thing that the police department has done in particular is they've already done that. And I think it's been a couple of years now we've allowed them to do that, to where the vehicles are not all parked behind the police department as they once were. The officers are allowed to take them, I mean, the ones that live in town are allowed to take them into their neighborhoods. It's helpful on a lot of different reasons, but one of the things that benefits us for doing that is that not all of our assets are located in one spot.
May I please ask Denise to comment? What are you seeing in other cities, Tulsa? How are they handling this, Denise, the spread of risk question?
Well, it's a combination question. Absolutely, they're utilizing their covered garages that are available and moving vehicles to that when bad weather is occurring. But we're also seeing some cities that are exploring adding permanent structures like you would see in a car lot that would cover the vehicles and give some amount of protection from wind hail events that we see more and more often in this part of the country. You know, always there's an opportunity for looking at spread of risk, taking the vehicles home. That's a very good initiative, and that is something that many cities do for that reason, and also to allow vehicles to be in different areas of the city to respond quickly in the event of an emergency. So those are all very important, but we have to all understand too, you know, we can't prevent every event and cover every vehicle. So then it becomes a matter of how can we mitigate and reduce that exposure. And so that's what we're seeing some other cities doing. There are also, you know, various things that are being purchased, financial mechanisms. We're seeing this in a lot of the coastal towns where they're buying a policy that if a hail event or a wind event occurs, then it automatically pays. The unfortunate problem with that, and we have priced them out, is they're very expensive. It would not be cost effective in the middle of the country at this point, but we do look for those pricing to come down, hopefully in the future.
Mr. Dingman, I've got this, it's a 79-page document, but it does It's by Gallagher Home Office, Natural Catastrophe and Climate Report. This talks about every one of the billion-dollar phenomena in America last year. And if any of you want this, I'd be glad to email it to you all.
Okay, thank you. Director Settle.
Just to remind the board, what Philip said was per occurrence, $10,000 per occurrence. So if we have a hailstorm that blankets a city and damages 10 buildings, we don't pay $10,000 for that one occurrence.
Deductible.
The one $10,000 deductible, that's it. So if you look back at the graph that we had, 2023, we have almost $6 million that we got back from AML for the hail damage that we got in 2023. So that's the key here, is a $10,000 deductible and per occurrence. Most places are $100,000 per item. And that's what I'm hearing the industry.
You're talking about a total assets almost $500 million.
Yeah.
Covered for a $10,000 per occurrence, one-time deductible, regardless of how many locations. And I can look you right in the eye and say, no other carrier in the United States does this.
So, obviously the premium's going up because we have a huge loss ratio, as Philip talked about. But if we have no damage and our loss ratio comes down, the 31 cents goes back down to 27, down to 26, and you'll eventually start bringing it back down. But it all depends on how much they paid out versus how much we recovered. And so if we have a huge hailstorm again, and we have 30 buildings, we're only up $10,000 instead of being out $3 million.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions, we need two board members to put this item on the February 18th.
So moved.
Thank you. Second. Thank you. This time we'll go to item 2.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Philip. Thank you.
Item 2 is a discussion related to the Water Utilities Department. Item 2A is discuss ideas to specifically address and expedite repair of water leaks. Presenting this item is Lance McAvoy, Director of Water Utilities.
Good evening. I'm going to pass around a couple of displays so that you kind of understand some of what we're dealing with. Both of these are galvanized pipe. The one that's kind of brown has actually been lacquered. It is a display piece that we keep for training purposes. The other one was taken out of the ground. The more silver one was taken out of the ground this year. Galvanized pipe is about 25% of where we see our service line leaks. When we have a leak on a galvanized pipe like this, it is very, very difficult to make a long-time permanent fix. Galvanized pipe is something that's being looked at to be removed under the Enhanced Lead and Copper Act, as well as in the city. These are actually not, when you look at this, you think, okay, that goes from the meter to the, from the main to the meter. Those are actually mains. They're undersized mains. And when you look inside, you see the tuberculation. So not only are they leaking, but they're reducing flow and pressure. We do have 2 projects sitting on the shelf that to replace those would be $15 to $20 million, and that would be about 40% of the galvanized pipe. It would also upsize that pipe in such a way that we would have much better fire flow for that. So one of the things that we can look at is actual projects that when we look at a heat map of where we have these, is the infrastructure so old that we're basically chasing the tail. We're chasing after stuff that as we fix a leak, we're going back and fixing a leak and going back and fixing a leak. And the answer is yes. And a lot of these are on service lines from the meter, from the main to the meter. Basically, to give you an idea of the leaks that we fixed since 2019, about 25% of those we've had to go back and refix. And so, because it's on galvanized lines, some of it, where it's at, people will run over it and constantly break it. We try to move those. But it's the fact that the infrastructure that we're tying into is causing some of the issue. So looking at where the infrastructure is and where we need to actually do replacement. We actually have lines on Garrison that are 140 years old, and those are mains. That if I were to dig that up, because it is sand cast iron, and I know that means something to Kevin, that may not mean a lot to anybody else, but they used to basically take sand, make their mold out of sand, and you pour the iron into it. And then you just shake the sand off. It's very rough on the outside. But I'm afraid if we ever dig that up, because it's 140 years old, we expose it, we're going to have a blowout. So planning to replace that and how we're going to do that so it doesn't impact 2 blocks of Garrison, which is all we have left, is something that we need to look at. There have been other ideas thrown out, and some have been serious, some have not been. I will revert to Director Settle when he said using flex tape. And I'm going to tell you, I actually investigated that because it's an idea, and we're not going to throw out any idea. Flex tape itself will tell you it is not to be used for water distribution and high pressure lines. So that was a no, and then I did mention it to the health department, and I won't say what they said, but it was basically no too. In the memo, I addressed one idea that was brought up in the past, either by the board or administration, and that was to hire plumbers to come and do the work. And the issue is that under state law, under the state statutes, which are based on the Safe Drinking Water Act, so they based theirs on the federal, we would have to have a licensed, a grade 4 distribution operator who holds that license on site, or a licensed engineer to observe the work. So then it's a matter of, okay, if I have licensed operators and I have them go watch a plumber, now I don't have the licensed operator for the crew that's working for us anyway.
Lance, and I'm going to just interject in because my question is on this topic specifically. With regard to, as you talked about in the memo, the plumbers, having to become a grade 4 distribution water operator, which the memo shows clearly that the Department of Health says that's permissible. What's, to the best of your knowledge, what's sort of the cost and time that it would take a plumber to acquire that certification?
So there is an 8-hour compliance course, 16 hours worth of math courses that they would have to sit through. You would have 3 24-hour additional classes, and then taking a national certification test that has a pass rate of about 20%.
So few weeks worth of sort of the certification classes and whatnot in the run-up to a test that sounds like it has a pretty difficult pass rate. What is the financial cost associated with that effort?
So
if any,
the classes are free, but the financial aspect would be whatever the plumber is out for taking those courses, because they're not offered here, so they would have to go to where they're offered, Northwest Arkansas or around the state, and then their hours of sitting in class, and then there is a financial cost for the test. I don't remember what that cost for the test is.
And so they're offered, the classes are offered by the state?
They're offered by both Arkansas Rural Water and the Arkansas Environmental Training Academy.
So there's not the ability to, host a few cohorts here in Fort Smith. There's just not the entity present here in the River Valley to do it?
Well, I mean, we could, but the issue is we're bringing in a trainer from the southeast side of the state. We do not have any adjunct faculty.
I see. Okay.
In Fort Smith or Van Buren. Those that were doing adjunct faculty, doing those classes, no longer do those classes or have retired.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mayor.
How are we training our employees?
We're sending them off. We send them off to Northwest Arkansas, to Springdale is one of the areas, Russellville. Sometimes we send them all the way to Lonoke because that's a very concentrated time of training to get them the training needed and then to take the test. And the test is only offered 4 times a year. So it's only offered quarterly by the health department. I forgot to mention that. So that's how we're doing that.
Any more questions for Lance at this time? If not, you may continue. Yeah, Director Kemp.
So in the past, when we were contracted with Forest Green, are you saying that Forest Green is a grade 4 distribution license?
No, at that time, we actually had our inspectors, because we didn't have any projects underway other than this project. This was a major project, and we had an inspector, one of our construction inspectors, who holds a D4 license on site, and they also were signing off that the amount of material used and the work was done properly.
So is this process, being a construction worker's boy, watching my dad over the years, could the city work with contractors to fix leaks and before anything is ever covered, be signed off by a city inspector?
While they're doing the work, it has to be observed under by a D4 operator or an engineer, a licensed engineer. They have to be on site while the work is being done, per the health department.
So who is over that department that requires us to do that? Is this, let me give you a little bit of my brain. My brain is saying, when do we declare an emergency? You know, government does that a lot, right? There's a state of emergency. Hey, we need to fix this. You know, we talk about 3 million gallons of water a day. You know, that's a lot. And if we could say, hey, you know, who do we need to say, hey, we propose a state of emergency so that we could get these repairs done, and allowing the cities to have an inspector process so things are above board. There's nothing hidden, but who's that us going to request something like that?
So the information I have is from the head of the engineering department for ADH, Arkansas Department of Health.
Okay.
I don't know about, I can tell you when I hear about a water emergency and what's declared as a water emergency around the U.S. and around the state, we are more talking Jackson, Mississippi, West Helena. Leaks are not normally considered, and when we talk about 3 million gallons or a 35% water loss, there are systems inside the state that have greater than 50% unaccounted for water or water loss, and they haven't declared an emergency. So it would be, you know, I don't know on that, and I believe also to declare an emergency, that would be the county judge that would have to start that. I don't know. I'd have to defer to Mr. Dingman on that.
The reason I ask, just before we go there, the reason I say that is the governor made a huge statement about how passionate she is for water, and, you know, loaning the municipal governments, which some people mistakenly thought were grants, they were loans, low interest loans, which, you know, anyone could go get. You know, getting a loan is not getting a grant. But, you know, in this particular case, we're saying we want to repair these leaks, and we will do them to spec. But when we talk about this threshold, and I would even advocate not only for us, I'd advocate for the communities across. If you're saying there are people that have worse situations than us, I would advocate that this might be something the governor should look at.
Okay, thank you.
But real quick, what's a state of emergency get you? In general.
I mean, in my mind, I'm just asking, that's why I brought it up, the leniency of such strict requirements so that these leaks can be fixed.
I mean, I think we're already exempt from those since we were exempt from Act 605, which most other cities in the state are not. I mean, we're not being held to the same standards for our water system because we have that exemption, correct?
No.
No, I think we are.
We are actually held.
Certainly are.
Yeah, the only thing that we are exempt from is Act 605, Act 545 as amended, when it deals with the water rate study. Everything else, we are held to the same standard.
So that's the only exemption we got.
That's the only exemption, because you're talking about, and I know we're talking about leaks, but when it comes to drinking water, you're talking about human health and safety, and that's why these are in place. Is worst case scenario, you put some people out of water. I mean, that's actually medium case. Worst case, you have somebody who doesn't do it right, and you end up with a waterborne disease outbreak. So that's why there's so much goes into requiring these operators to understand the proper way of doing things, the ramifications if they do it wrong.
It seems to me like a common sense solution to this problem might be to hire more people. And since we've appropriated money for 40 positions, I don't know why it's such a problem to get them hired. I mean, if you go, I went today to the city website, there's, I think, 8 positions available, none of them in the utilities department. I think there was one for a firefighter, one for someone at the scale house, but why aren't we hiring people, is my question.
So,
and that may be for administration, I don't know.
Well, actually, that's in the next topic, but since you've asked, we currently, as far as leak crews, we have 6 positions open, but those 6 positions are currently filled by temporary employees, and we're using that to determine if those employees are a good fit for us and if we're a good fit for them. So as
Do
their
they
time...
have the level 4 certification?
No, because they're entry level, and then they can, once they get, so once their contract is up, we have the option to hire them full time, and we have done that. That's how we've gotten down to the 7, and these are the lowest level positions. It's the up, as you move up, you have to have the supervisor on site. The 4-person has to have the 4 license. Not every person of the crew has to have the D4.
Are we going through a temp agency or?
Yes.
Okay. Who?
I'd have to ask Mr. Lawley. I'm sorry, I don't remember off the top of my head.
Director Settle is next in the queue, and then Director Rico.
So Lance, you talked about at the very beginning, this is based on the Arkansas state law that we have to do this, or is Arkansas state law based on the Clean Water Act from the federal government?
It's based on the Clean Water Act from the federal government.
All right, would you?
Or actually the Safe Drinking Water, sorry, the Safe Drinking Water Act.
The Safe Drinking Water Act. Could you get the next couple of days, would you get the regulations for us?
Yeah.
Where that's spelled out, just the regs that we can see that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And you want the Arkansas ones, correct?
Well,
Or do you want both?
if the Fed is, if the Arkansas is based on the Fed, I'd like to see the Arkansas one, and that relates to the Feds.
Okay.
And if the Arkansas says it goes to, federal code blank, 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 then send me the federal code.
Okay.
Thank you.
Director Rigo, and then Director Neil Martin.
So a couple things. I guess in kind of the spirit of what Director Kemp brought up, I think it'd be worthwhile for administration to explore, what, if any, willingness or ability or variances are possible with ADH as far as things that can make us more flexible from a repair workforce standpoint. And so, if I'm understanding correctly, the current situation is you have to have the grade 4 operator there for the duration of the work, correct? Are there possibilities for, can an operator float between 2 or 3 efforts being made in a day? So, and then of course, he or she would have to come and make the final, sign off, if you will, or observations to make sure the work was, done correctly before the work is completed, and the holes filled back up. So, perhaps rather than having to have a grade 4 operator stationary at one project for the duration of the project, if they can float and observe, multiple projects, that might be something that could help multiply the force available. So something to look into. And then another thought, just looking and rereading the water leak status report, the final one for 2024, you had talked about, one of the paragraphs mentioned that utilities has been able to hire new employees, working to train them properly as quickly as possible. Salary increases improved by the board has helped greatly to attract new applicants and retain existing staff, so we were glad to be able to help with that. My question is, this was written presumably December, late last year, how's the training and the activating going? Is this the temp folks you're referring to?
That's part of the temp, because if we hired everybody that we were out, at one time we had over 20 positions open, and you brought them in, we didn't have enough people to train them as we went. So this is kind of again, the temp is a lot of hand digging, things of that nature, making sure that they are going to work out, and the ones that we've hired, we're now getting their training brought up to speed to be more helpful. The other thing that we have to have, and it's the best way to run, is when we have a full-time operator, we require them to have a CDL. Because if you have a 4-man crew that's digging and you have dump trucks, you've got to have drivers to drive those dump trucks, and you have to have a spotter, and you have to have a seasoned, well-trained backhoe operator. And all of those have to be able to pretty much fill in for each other. So if somebody's out sick and we had to drop to a 3-man crew, we can still operate, as not efficiently, but we can still operate that way. And if you only had 1 or 2 CDL drivers, that becomes very difficult. Now, we train, the utility department trains all the CDL drivers for Fort Smith. That's housed within the utility department. So
we don't use a temp agency to hire them?
no, the CDL, it would cost us way too much to hire
I guess I just don't understand why we're using a temp agency at all to hire these positions.
It's to, if we hired somebody and they show up for 2 days and they walk out, we've gone through all of the work and we have nothing to show. Whereas with a temp agency, if we know they're going to work out and they're wanting to work with us full time and we want them, at the end of that time, we're able to hire them, and we're not out of having to repost the job, re-interview. This way we can have them picked out by the temp agency. It streamlines the interview process.
But we do have an in-house HR department. I felt like the deal with the temp agency was, they were friends with Carl. He was trying to get his buddies paid, throw them some business. And I don't know if this is that agency, but that was a concern I had that I expressed. Of course, I think it was like a 6-1 vote, but, I think we're just lacking some efficiency here.
No, if I might add to that, I think using the temp agency for those general labor positions is efficient for the reasons that Lance mentions. Is that a person shows up with an expectation of a job, even if it's a general labor job, they do it for a few days, it's not for them, they go do something else. The ones that stick around for the duration of the 3 months that we use them for, they know the job. If we end up talking with them about a full-time job, they already know what it entails. They're not going to show up for 2 days and then quit because they are accustomed to what the job. I think that is an efficient use of time to get those general labor positions filled. Higher skilled positions, we don't do it that way. But for these positions where there's a 4-person crew and they're doing the labor of the digging and the moving and the all those sorts of things, then I think that is an efficient way to do it.
Well, I would say, just to push back on that, I don't know why getting someone through a temp agency makes them less likely to quit after 2 days.
It doesn't. But we, again, if we hire
Because we're
somebody...
paying them more than if we hired them on ourselves.
No.
Right? Isn't it like we're paying them like $20 an hour? Because I think that's what was discussed initially, where we're paying everybody else like, $11.50 or whatever that grade is.
I believe we're paying less than what our grade is, but I would have to check that with Mr. Lawley.
Director Kemp, then Director Settle, and then Rigo in the queue.
I share the same sentiments as Director Christina Casavas here. From my understanding, when we used to hire temp workers, we would pay more per hour for the employee, and then eventually we would want to bring them in because we're like, hey, we can pay less for the employee. They have to make a commission. So, they're not a ministry. They really are going for it. I think it is worth looking at, especially with our own in-house HR department. But I will say, I've talked to contractors about this issue because I'm trying to figure out things as I'm mentioning things in public. And I've been told that that whoever would come here, these other private companies are going to be able, because they have a demand right now for this sort of situation, they're going to snatch them up and probably pay them a little bit more, offer them a little bit more benefits. And so I'm starting to wonder if this is a go back and explore contracts with companies. Now, the previous company used, doesn't have much interest here, but I would say there are companies that could have interest that we should look at. And I'm to Director Rigo's comments, especially if we talk about workforce development, let's figure out how we can make this easy for them, tutoring them, bringing them through it to get the classification to be able to do this sort of work. Because it sounds like, as I listen to you about the galvanized pipe, we're going to be fixing this stuff for a long time. And so the more we can develop a work pool of companies, especially these smaller companies that have less overhead, less insurance demands, to me that's appealing, because I think we're going to have employment issues whether we bring it in-house or through temp agency. But I still think in the meantime, I just don't see the temp agency thing working probably profitable for us as much as we think it is. My other question is, how many grade 4 employees do we have? I know we talk about we have the crews, but how many of those are actually legitimately able to have that certification?
I believe currently that we have. I will need to verify that, but I know that we have at least throughout the city, because I am a distribution 4 operator as well. There are probably between 12 and 24.
So would you say that these are primarily, when they take that process, are they watching the crew the entire day?
Yes, they are part of the crew.
Okay.
For most
How
of
many
them,
of those
That's the
then-
current requirement,
that's
right?
the current requirement, yeah.
So then, but I mean, obviously,
But we
you're
also-
not going to be on the eligibility to go out and watch a crew all day. So my question then is, how many of these employees do we have that are eligible, time permitted wise, and are a grade 4 to go out and look at these jobs?
That I'll have to get, I know on our inspection crew, we have at least 3 that are inspectors, but they are also looking at, those inspectors had come up through the ranks, and they're also dealing with consent decree projects, other projects. If I may, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm going to, and I'm sorry about that.
No, you're fine.
But you made a statement, and I think it's a fallacy in the way that we think.
Okay.
You made the statement, we're going to be chasing leaks on galvanized pipe, and that's not wrong. The fallacy is chasing leaks isn't what we need to do. Replacing the infrastructure so it stops leaking and we don't have repeat leaks on that infrastructure is really where we're going to see our return on investment be higher. If you replace lines that 25% of the services keep leaking on those lines, and no matter what you do, you're going to be going out every year, every 2 years to replace it because the infrastructure is to the point that it's way past its lifespan, you're throwing money away. If you go out and you replace it and upsize to what it should be and bring it up to code so that we have proper fire flow, proper pressure, and it stops the leaks from happening, that's where we're actually going to see the leak number to where we're not having to continue to
So I think you bring a valid point, and I would say back that it'd be worth putting a triage of a grade 1, 2, or 3, and some leaks the city takes on, some leaks are contracted out, so that we can focus on these matters. A good example, the resident that you and I have spoken about recently, just an email, and you followed up well, did your part as far as getting someone to go look at the leak, and it has been discovered it was a leak. I will tell you, she was told 2 years ago that it was not a leak, and then now it is a leak. Now, that's not putting it on you, I'm just saying the system itself. But she's leak number 719, and she's over by a relatively newer part of town. So I would imagine her pipe isn't the kind of pipe that I held. And my point is, she'll now have to wait a long time to get that leak fixed. And that, you know, she's a sweet person. I don't think she's upset in that regard. But to my point, if we would triage this, we have an opportunity, in my mind, with this focus, to create a perception that we are tightening our belts and doing our due diligence. And I think that's why I wanted to bring this back. And we still have not even proposed how we could get to 250 leaks. And I think, you know, we might have heard a plan of contracting out and things, and maybe we can't afford it, but we're still not moving to the path. The best we can do is about 150, which is, I think, as many that are getting reported. Like if you fix 150, but 80 or 90 get reported, we're not gaining ground, which I think if we're going to talk about this as well, and I'll definitely relay to my colleagues, the thing that also is, if we hire 30 new employees, and let's say we could hire them, and there are, 15 of them could become grade 4, licensed distribution license, inevitably we will get caught up, and they know what's going to happen, that they will be cut. Because in theory, you build this workforce, and then you go do it. And that's why I think contracting and triaging situations allow these contractors to pick up work for their companies, but at the end of the day, they know that there is an ending window when they help us get caught up. I just don't think we've gotten caught up based on what I'm hearing from Director Martin talking about when we were making all these ideas with the different director, and I know that's what we've made comments to. I think it's just time to go back to a conversation of getting caught up, and it may not be adding more employees to city staff.
So if I may, what does getting caught up look like?
I think, good question. I think that nobody in the city of Fort Smith should have to wait for more than 60 days for a water leak to be fixed in their yard.
30 days. I'm 30 days.
But I'll give you 60 at this point. That's what I'm saying. If the lady that we are talking to, that to me, 60-day window, I would love to see that those are fixed. Now, if it's a huge situation, I understand, like if we're going to have to bore under roads and we're going to have to do certain things, but that's my triage idea. Throw that out to somebody else, but let's let our city guys get in there and get these wins. And if we only got, less than, 3 or 4 that are available to go sign off on these jobs and sit there for the job, that's why we're not fixing as many leaks. We just don't have the employees with the certification and the availability to go on the job.
If you did contract work, because our employees that are working the crews that we have, all of them have a D4 operator.
But that's what I just asked a minute ago. I asked, how many people do we have?
And I said between 12 and 24. I'd have to get the exact number
Okay.
that have the
Okay.
D4. But all of
Thank
the
you.
crews have that. And then you ask how many of the inspectors. And that's where I said the inspectors that are construction inspectors that look at pipe being laid in for consent decree projects and other things, that I believe is around 3.
And at the moment, what's the number of regular leak crews?
Regular leak crews is 5.
Okay.
We have 8 crews total. 1 crew does new taps, so if a new construction and they need a water meter, they put it in. But if they don't have any water meters to put in, they work on leaks. We have 1 crew that works on fire hydrants and valves that need to be fixed. And then we have another crew that deals with water quality and the transmission line, and they will fill in as needed. And we have pulled them in on Saturdays to help get caught up on leaks.
Director Settle and Director Neil Martin, and then Director Christina Casares.
Thank you, Mayor. Lance, what % do you think of the leaks are within 2 to 3 feet of the meter?
I would have to look at that and see.
20, 30%, 40%?
I mean, I would be guessing.
Well, the reason I'm asking is, so if I'm home and I have a leak in my yard between the meter and my house, it's on me to do, right?
Yes.
I call my buddy Neil, is a plumber. He comes out, digs the yard up, fixes that line, right? Neil's not a 4-person.
No, because it's state plumbing. That's where state plumbing code begins.
Okay. So my question becomes this: is the level 4 needed for the transmission lines, or is level 4 needed between the transmission line and the meter? Because I really thinking about what you're talking about, and my mind goes to a couple places. Is I get the replacement of lines, I get the transmission lines, high pressure, I get all that. I struggle with what's the difference between this side of the meter and this side of the meter. In theory, PVC and PVC. I go back to the plate, right? So as long as it's within 3 or 4 feet of the meter and it's in a asphalt, concrete area, I don't understand the difference between, because a lot of times I see find leaks, it's around the meter, right? It's on our side of the meter. So I push them back a little bit, saying I'll challenge the Arkansas State Code, and it says, why not on either side of the meter? Because me doing it in my yard and 4 feet away doing it on the other side of the meter It's the same area, same line, same everything. So I think there could be a win there to what Director Kemp was talking about is maybe the areas around the meters would be an easy way to say, we're going to take a licensed plumber, Neil the plumber is going to come out there and take care of it for us. And then that way our teams can focus on their transmission lines, their galvanized, other places. So I want you to think what I'm saying, because I don't see a difference between a plumber in my yard and a plumber 2 feet on that side of the meter, as long as it doesn't touch the 2 or 6 inch transmission line, as long as it's off the T and it's right there.
Okay. I will ask Health Department on that.
Thank you.
I apologize, Director Rigo, and then Director Neil Martin, and then Director Christina Casales.
Thank you, Mayor. So with the 5, I've got a couple things to say, a few things to say. So with the 5, I want to make sure I'm understanding, we're all understanding. The 5 regular leak crews that exist currently, the way regulations currently are in their full force, no waivers or adjustments sought. So as we currently exist, each of those leak crews is required to have the grade 4 operator there for the duration of a repair that they do.
Yes.
And then did I understand a moment ago that all, or at least a healthy number of the folks on those crews have to have a CDL?
Yes.
Okay, is it all, or is it the ones that are?
It's all.
Okay. So
They have 9, I believe it's 9 months to get their CDL from the date of hire.
Okay, so a couple of things I just want to share. First, I do want to not get lost in the shuffle. Appreciation and thanks for the folks that are doing that work every day. And I think we've all learned a little bit tonight about, that's perhaps a bit more involved from a regulatory standpoint, from a certification standpoint, than we would know. And I would want to share a couple statistics from the end of the year leak report. We have challenges, but in 2024, 1,615 leaks were repaired, which is by far the biggest amount ever. And when you look at the first statistics that were included in the packet, a whopping 8 repairs done in 2020. That's a massive increase. When we talk about privatization and outsourcing, I think there's room for it, obviously, in a targeted way. I think there was some instructive things learned from the contract with Forest Grid in 2021. And I will say this is not any sort of criticism of Forest Grid, wonderful company, great company, local company. But, we had a situation where we spent $2.6 million with that entity. So that's $3,600 a day for a 730-day contract. 619 leaks were fixed. So that's, $4,200 a leak for less than 1 fix per day. And I can't imagine that since 2021, any of the purely outsourced numbers would be something that would be cheaper for our tax money to go towards. And so I agree with Director Kemp and others that, there's probably some targeted uses for the private sector, but I don't know that we can again go towards what we did in 2021, which was just, you all try to take care of it for a year, because I think there's really some substantial costs associated with that. And then 2 other quick points, and thank my colleagues for their indulgence. I think that there's an assumption undergirding a lot of our desires around hiring when it comes to this position, and that assumption is that there's a huge labor force that is desiring to be leak repair grunts. And I think that there certainly are folks out there, but I think the challenge that we have is, we can appropriate money, we can budget money, we can even encourage how things are posted and what type of human resource efforts get utilized. But I think it's fair to say that there's still going to be many more openings and workers that we want relative to the people actually considering the positions. And so that's just a challenge many industries have to live with. And the last thing I would say for a suggestion or an idea that I think is very important, and I would like note to be taken of it and consideration given to it, is that, was it Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. I mean, there's so much information, both accurate and inaccurate, that is transacted on Facebook in our community, for instance. And so I really think that there needs to be serious thought and consideration given to having an ability for leak reporting, leak awareness, leak tagging to happen via social media and via Facebook. So we do digital reporting through the apps and things like that. So it's already something that people are doing on their phone and phone-based, but I would think maybe there could be something within our city social media infrastructure where we would say to people, hey, no matter where you're posting this on Facebook, whatever forum, whatever group, whatever comment, if you tag this Facebook page or use this hashtag or, do both, not only will there be someone on the city staff, in Josh's orbit that sees it, they will also follow that journey, share the story of that repair with you. So if someone sees holy cow, I saw this on Facebook, a huge gushing leak, we need to tag the city communication shop, they can be aware of it. They can obviously help escalate it, bring it to the attention of the repair crews, and keep people posted in that space where people are looking and seeing and rightly, in many senses, becoming upset about something. Well, let's just not have upset, and anger go out into the void. Let's have it be seen and then acted upon and hopefully then resolved. And the person who tags it and brings it to the attention, it's not just a complaint out into the social media ether. It's we're tagging this, we're bringing this to the attention of the city leadership so that they can keep us posted on fixing it. I think we have to recognize that there's just so much communication that's transacted there, and we need to keep people equally posted in that space. Thank you. Thank you all.
Director Neil Martin and then Director Christina Casavage.
You mentioned the number of crews that you have. You said 8. Mm-hmm. Those 4-person crews.
Yes.
So we have 32 total people. Is that correct?
That should be about right.
But 20 of those are actively fixing leaks every day.
Yes.
Okay. If I said to you, Lance, how many crews do you need to address our water leaks, to get us down to the 60-day or the 30-day, what would you say?
I need equipment before I need crews. That's what I would say.
Well, I mean,
and I'm sorry, but I have so much equipment that goes down that we have crews that aren't, they're waiting 2 days and they're working with other crews to, we're breaking it up to get things fixed because we don't have a backhoe. We don't have that. I need to be able to keep the crews that I have fully functioning.
What equipment does every crew need?
Basically, our entire fleet has aged out with the exception of the excavators. So we need to have backhoe, trailer, 2 dump trucks, and a service truck.
Backhoe, trailer, 2 dump trucks?
And a service truck.
For every crew?
Yes.
Okay. We're proving equipment all the time. What's the age of all of this equipment? Well, let me ask you that. Why do you say you need equipment? I get equipment. I get it.
We need to replace equipment because it's aged out.
So,
we have.
Does aged out mean not functional at all?
No, it means that we have spent. Last year we spent almost $300,000 more keeping the equipment up and running than the year before, and that number we expect to go up. On our dump trucks, we have, and I have the original cost and what we've spent on it. We have 3 of our dump trucks that what we spent on it, we've spent more on maintenance. And this is major maintenance. several others that are getting close to that. On our excavators, we're good. Those were purchased in 2019.
Excavators, you mean your backhoes?
No, excavator's different. Excavator is kind of a mini X or a medium X.
Did I miss that when you went through your, I had backhoe
We
trailer,
have those,
two
that's
dump
why
trucks?
we use those if it's in an alley, because we have to be able, we don't use them all the time, because
So
they're not a heavy
An
lifting.
excavator is not required on every,
Correct.
okay. All
We
right.
use those when needed. Backhoes, you're looking at about 5,000 hours for urban environment because we're dealing with concrete. So if you look at a backhoe that's in a field digging and it's just dirt, you can get about 6,000 hours. In where you're digging and you've got asphalt that you're picking up and the rocks and all of that, it decreases the life. We have one that has 6,745 hours, one that has 5,830. The rest are in the 4,000, 4,900 range.
Have we thought about leasing any of this equipment?
That's something.
We did that one time and it didn't work out.
Yeah.
We've done it both ways,
Okay.
and in terms of when we didn't have cash available to
Right.
purchase outright, we've done leasing,
Okay.
and not just in utilities, but in other departments as well, but we've
Okay.
gotten away from that as we can.
So are you telling me that if we kept our current staffing of 5 crews of 4 people that regularly work leaks, and you had all new equipment, that we would have the ability to increase the amount of leaks that we're resolving on a daily, weekly, monthly basis?
Yes, and I could then go back and after I saw what the number of leaks were that we've fixed in that time frame, tell you how many additional crews that I have. But for me to say I need, 3 additional crews to fix leaks, if I don't have the equipment to keep all my current crews busy, I'm basically throwing money away.
So how much you talk, can you go back and tell us of all this backhoe, trailer, 2 dump trucks, service truck,
Yeah, I
what
can
you
get,
would need?
I can get that. Yeah, and I will tell you, I know Director George Casavas asked the question at the last meeting if this has been in our budget, if we have requested this, and we have been making requests since the 2020 budget. However, we also have debt service coverage that we've looked at, so we have been prioritizing our top 5 to 10 items, and the rest, if you go back and look in the budget, you'll see a list, but there's no dollar amount.
Are you telling us that never, what I'm hearing is that never made it to the board for
It
consideration?
made it to the board in the,
It made it to the board in the fact that it was on a piece of paper somewhere.
But not a
it
dollar
was
amount
not one of
saying we needed it,
the
yeah.
priorities that we wanted.
correct. Well, one of the
Or not-
priorities that we could have.
Not one of the priorities that made it for us up to consideration.
Correct. That is 100% correct.
All right. Okay, so I need that.
Okay.
And so I think we're going to be talking some dollars there. What's the yearly cost for a crew? Equipment, people? I mean, if we're backhoes, trailers, dump trucks, service trucks, that's quite expensive, and we are, and we're not even talking people yet. So I want to see what that is. And we talked about these pipes up here. This is 25% of our leaks, and we have to go back and redo them. But we still have 75% of our leaks, not that.
25% of our, we have 25% that's a repeat leak, and most of those are on galvanized.
Okay.
So if we fix it on the galvanized, we may be back in 6 months or 18 months to refix that leak.
So what I heard was that's 25% of our leaks. Is that a true statement or not?
No, that we're still trying to get how many were on galvanized.
I mean, because there's a lot of leaks on the east side of town that I don't believe is galvanized.
So if you go down Free Ferry and Riverland, you would not expect that to be galvanized. That's all galvanized.
Okay.
So, I mean, some of that on the east side is galvanized, and that's actually the projects that I mentioned that we have designed that really we need to replace those lines, and that's where the money would be better spent when we're dealing with contractors. That's actually down Free Ferry and 74th into Riverland, those areas.
Let me ask some of you guys that have been on the board for a little while. I've been on since 2019. I didn't hear a lot of this before I got on the board. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't hear a lot of it when I got on the board. It seemed like in 2019 when I got on and we were replacing water meters, it started to spike. Based on my recollection, that obviously I don't have the history that you guys did.
I mean, we had water meter replacements in 2010, 2011.
I'm talking.
Water meter.
What I'm thinking. What I'm trying to say is, I felt like the water leaks spiked when we replaced water meters.
I think there was always an underground for water leaks. I think it just came from as more, when I first started, social media didn't exist. I mean, you got to think about it became more popular there. If you think back, 2007, Lake Fort Smith filled up. I mean, you got to think about that. Lake Fort Smith was under construction in the early 2000s. Lake Fort Smith filled up in 2007. The consent decree hit us in 2015. So and then we had the pandemic, the floods. You were here. The focus really was Lake Fort Smith. The meter changeouts in 2011, if I remember right. The first meter changeouts in 2011, and then we had the consent decree. Sewer was the biggest thing after that.
And I'll mention in 2019 when we switched over the UB billing and we had all the issues at the beginning of 2019.
I walked into it. What seemed like a disaster, leaks and billing issues.
I mean, if you're asking history, I'm telling you history. Dre, George, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's kind of the history. If I'm mistaken, right?
I mean, if I'm off, I'm off.
I think I can speak to something that goes along with your theory. Is I had a gentleman, and he's an engineer, and he had a situation where he was being, billed, and it kept creeping up, and he happened to be home when the gentleman came out to, check it and fix it, and there was not, I think it was called a backflow preventer, so the water was coming in and out, and he was being charged both ways, and he said the person that came from the city to repair his leak said when they put those new meters in 2019, a lot of them didn't get these backflow preventers. And that's been an issue with a lot of people.
Is that true, Lance?
Well, if the current meters that we have that we put in 2019, if you have water flow back through it the backwards way, it will actually, if I'm not mistaken, I need to check this, it actually runs it backwards. Because we've actually found where people have flipped their meter, and when we read it, they had, their last read was less than their,
So you're just asking for history.
I was asking, just trying to figure out if there's some correlation to that. Not necessarily. I feel like you got some of these pipes and you start to mess with it. You put a meter in and you're jostling things around. Is it just?
Yeah, I mean, think about it. You talked about Fiona Hills, 1970s, 1980s. My house was built in 1996. You start thinking about you're getting to 30 years now. Some places you get to 40 years. Technology's changed. Galvanized was the way to go. Then it went to black pipe. It went to PVC. Now it's CVPC. You can be Schedule 40 or Schedule 80. All those things have a consequence. So, unfortunately, what's the goal? I hear 30 days, but truly, what's the goal? There's always good until you do a complete 100% rehab of everything in the ground at one time. There's always going to be some number of fixes you have to do on a constant basis. I mean, hearing fire hydrants surprised me tonight. I haven't heard any fire hydrants, but hearing we doing fire hydrant work, that surprised me. But you know what? How many hydrants we got? 8,000 hydrants, something like that.
Something like that. So. And I will tell you, I went back and checked some records from 2019. In 2019, we fixed several leaks from 2005.
A couple other things I've got. I think the board should maybe have some conversation with some of our contractors out there, because from what I've heard from them is some of the repairs that they were doing were not just fixing a leak. I mean, they were boring under boring under streets. And I think that contributes to this dollar amount. I think there were some challenges with how they were deployed in the city. And, you know, I think there's some efficiency could be gained through some of that. I mean, I don't know. I've heard enough significant challenges with our contractors on this particular project that was problematic, that they left $1 million on the table. Now, they're doing work, they're doing a lot of work around, but they left $1 million on the table. That tells me something. So I think we need to take that in consideration. You know, the last thing that I'll get to here is, you know, I wonder if we can do some kind of appropriation from the general fund that rewards performance and accuracy. I don't, you know, if that allows us to be able to hire more folks, if that rewards performance for getting leaks resolved faster, let's make it worth their while. If that's $250,000, $500,000, let's incentivize our guys to close out leaks as quickly and as efficiently, and it's where it's not going to recur. Like, you can't just go fix a leak. Hey, I fix a leak, check, and then it breaks 2 months later. Let's appropriate some dollars to incentivize them to be able to go out as much as they want. Now, it's a 4-person crew. Crew's got to be all together. Appropriate some money to do it. You want to work 80 hours a week? 80 hours a week.
So,
and I'll reward you for as many as you do on some basis. We can figure that out with some basis and see if that's the incentive that they need to be able to do.
So the only thing I'm going to state is I do have concerns about 80-hour work weeks with safety, because crews do need downtime.
I agree.
So safety is first and foremost in my mind. And doing it, and you've already kind of addressed that, doing it right, because we are dealing with public health and safety. And then the other question that I have, and it goes kind of back to, if equipment isn't functioning and you've got a crew that is assigned equipment that functions and another crew is waiting for equipment that functions, are you penalizing that crew because of something that's beyond their control?
Maybe. I mean, go get it done.
Okay, thank you, Director. Director Savage is next in the queue.
So 2 things, you know, I think Director Settle brought up a good point about if it's within so many feet of the meter. You know, if we need to get the law changed, now's the time to do that. Let's go down to Little Rock. The legislative session's going on. Let's pitch it.
I believe that would have to be a federal law change, but I'm going to verify that.
Oh, I thought it was the Arkansas Department.
It is, but it's based on the federal Clean Drinking Water or Safe Drinking Water Act.
Also, too, you know, we need to be mindful of it and think about when we're talking about the leak and the cost of the leak, it's not just the cost of repairing the leak, it's all the damage that's done while these leaks sit. And so I know this from personal experience, because we had a leak for over a year and it flooded our yard, and you know, we didn't ask for reimbursement from the city for this, but it ruined our irrigation system. I mean, we spent thousands of dollars because it froze. I mean, I think the leak started in April, and then by the time it got to winter, it froze, and it busted all those heads, and my husband's been complaining about it ever since. But it was, you know, it rotted out some of our plants. And I know one woman I talked to, you know, big circle drive out in Riley Farms, huge driveway, washed it all out. She had, I think it was like a main that broke, and it was there for 8 months. And then we had to replace her whole driveway. And the guy on Towson that has a business, they created a sinkhole. So I think we had to replace his parking lot. So it's not just the cost of these leaks, it's the cost of the damage they do. So we've got to figure a way to get these leaks down, because water is very, you know, corrosive. It's very damaging. And, you know, if we can figure out how to get it where they're not sitting for 6 or 12 or 18 months and causing additional damage, I think that'll be a huge cost savings to the city.
Director Kemp.
I would love to go, but I want to let Director Good here, if you'd like to go first, I'll defer to you. I know you had some comments.
Thank you, Director Kemp. Lots of good comments. My question, Lance, is, so since the board is talking about focusing on leaks, what is it that you need that hasn't gotten to the board in forms of equipment and personnel? What do you need from this board? Because it's been said that, the requests have been made that hasn't made it to the board. We're well aware of some of the needs and additional needs that we didn't get to speak about. But to be honest, while we're talking about we don't get to speak about it, it's because of our budget. So if we were to go above what was if we were to go beyond what's budgeted, how much more of the budget do you need if we focus primarily on consent decree, but also had a focus on just the team, not to incentivize, but to work on these leaks? That's what we need to know.
Okay. And I have that along with, to make sure that we have reliable equipment and enough equipment.
And again, once we have that information, then the board will have it, and then the board will then have to determine how we get those revenues, because the additional personnel we're talking about and the equipment will cost additional revenue. And where will the board get those revenues from? And it can't simply be drawn down from the general fund. It has to come in form of rates.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Okay.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Maybe
Okay.
cost savings from things we're not replacing, like
okay.
driveways.
Well, let me tell you. Okay, so we remember sharing equipment. We've had Parks Department and other departments talking about having to share backhoes in former budget meetings. I mean, we know that we're short equipment, and because we're talking about budgetary items and not wanting to raise rates, we have to work within the budgets that we have. Otherwise, we looked at efficiencies. We've tried. The department heads are great at what they do. If we have a suggestion for them, let's give it to them. Otherwise, let them give us what they need, and then we'll go.
I think Director Kemp and then Director Rigo.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I feel that equipment is easy, but qualified people is hard.
Yes.
That's, to me, the thing that I want to make sure that we're getting our minds thinking through. And I have a few other thoughts here. Why not, could we consider a tier-down unit that doesn't have a dump truck? I mean, a dump truck's not needed probably for every leak. I mean, could we look at a beefed-up truck to pull a Mini X, just like a small outfit might run, so you don't have to have a CDL driver? Does everything need to have this dump truck and this big outfit with the demand? I think that's a question I have. You don't have to answer it tonight. It's just a thought to scale down, similar like the fire department's trying to do with the Tahoes and those things of that nature. I know I talked to one contractor, and he was like, not every group I send out, I send with a dump truck. He said, we have other bigger trucks that are not dump trucks. On the contract, I know Director Rigo had talked about, and I've heard it mentioned as well before, but from my understanding, having met with that contractor, they were only repairing leaking meter services. They were not tasked to go fix water leaks. That's a big difference in the output and the performance, and probably why they walked away from it, because it was some of the things where they were getting inundated with phone calls of people calling them instead of the city. So I think when we talk about talking to our contractors, I think we need to be careful that we're presenting appropriate data. I mean, they're not saying it costs that much to fix leaks. They could fix leaks more efficiently than that, but they were being asked to service leaking meter services.
That's not true. And I'm just going to tell you right now, they were hired, their contract said, to fix leaking water services, water line services. And that is what we gave them.
So they were
Remains-
not boring under the road and required to fix the long lines?
There were times where they did bore under the road because the meter is on the opposite side, and they had to run a new line from the other side of the road to where it was leaking, because the leak was somewhere on that line, and it was more efficient to run a new line to the meter site.
So I think the deficiency in this case then is that wasn't clear, because that is not what I was shared with about that.
What kind of leaks were those that they're boring under the road? Were these for, like large companies or
Houses.
not just for houses, right?
Yes, houses. We do it all the time for houses. And these were ones that were put in that did not have, so right now, if you build a house and we have a water, say the water main's on this side of the road and your house is here, the contractor is required to put a conduit underneath the road that the water line runs in, so that if a leak develops, we can just pull a new line through there. We don't have to put in a new bore. But we have several places before that became one of our standards, that people would just put the line underneath the road and then pave the road over it. And so to put a new line in, you can't just pull it through the dirt, or conduit's the better way to go. So we have to do that. In fact, this week, it was either this week or the end of last week, we went out, there were 2 leaks on side by side, and when they got out there, they didn't have a conduit for either one. So we were able to bore one conduit underneath the road, put a line in each one, split it out, and it saved us from having to do 2 bores. And it fixed 2 leaks at one time. So yeah, we do more for houses, boring for houses, than we do for commercial.
So to me, it's as simple as Director Good just said, and I just want to say, exploring equipment and reporting back to us. Explore contractors again, and a triage is a thought that I would love administration to consider here, with a sort of triage plan. How could that help? And then the last question I have is, there was a comment made, and it was not in a memo, but there was a comment made in discussion one time that water department used to have some money, but another department, or there was a need through financial tough times, and money was pulled from the utilities department to help that. Did that happen, or did that not happen?
I think probably not. I mean,
And I
frankly,
could've heard that in discussion.
frankly, it would have gone the other way, if I remember right.
Okay.
I mean, even with the general fund at 9%, we never touched it.
Well, I'm just making sure, because you bring up a comment of where we're going to get the money. I'm like, well, if it's helped other departments before, then I think it's time to look at the allocations of that to your point. So, thank you.
Thank Director Rigo and then Director Neil Martin.
Thank you, Mayor. So, you talk about equipment, or, comments made about equipment being easy. It's certainly easier than people. Director Good makes good points about clearly articulating to us what you feel would be necessary from a staff and equipment standpoint to be, fully capable on the prioritization of leak repairs. I think we have to remind ourselves, both as a governing body and as a communicative body, that there are times when you can have the money available for equipment or personnel, and sometimes there's just a number in the current climate. There's just some number of months that it will take you to acquire the equipment. It's one thing to have the money. Getting the equipment and actually having it, present to run around town and do it sometimes takes many months. And so I just hope that we are conscious of that, both internally and in a communicative standpoint. And I made my point earlier about the difficulties of hiring individuals, which of course is the other leg of the stool. So comment was made earlier about 30 days being a goal, 60 days, and that kind of gets to the list, the leak list, if you will. And in the year-end report, it mentioned that the oldest leak on the list is from 2022 and October of 2022, and that's a leak that seems, you describe it in the memo, but I'll read it for folks who haven't read it. Leaks located on Mazard Road. To repair the leak, staff will need to install a valve to prevent a large area water shutdown. Here we get into equipment and things, supplies. As there are few suppliers of the valve needed, water utilities will bring an ordinance for sourcing the work in February of 2025. Once that valve is available and installed, the leak will be repaired. And so my question for consideration is, obviously, when you look at how to prioritize leaks, some sit on the list for longer than others because of the equipment that's required or the supplies that are required to fix them. Obviously, the 7 of us play a role in the shuffling of the list. If one of us presumably really agitates about a particular leak, I reckon it gets bumped up. And then there's probably, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if a leak gets reported, 5 months ago, and then there's probably never any follow-up about it, nobody ever calls, it doesn't seem to be in any sort of deteriorating status to the area around it, it's not necessarily in a high-traffic area, is it logical to assume that just by nature that leak slides further down the prioritization list versus some that are hotter or have more attention on them, if you will? I think, is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it is. And if I may, to make your point, we have 88 leaks on the current leak list from 2023. Okay? Those are not, if you look at some of the ones that we fixed from 2025 that have been called in this year, those leaks are not as bad, if you will, as putting people out of water, loss of pressure. We also try to, this time of year, address leaks that are running into the road because we don't want ice over.
Sure.
So we do prioritize those based on that.
So thank you. So there's a process,
Yes.
that's semi-formal that
Yes.
occurs to arrange the work. And so my question for consideration is, and looping back to what I said earlier, if we're going to move to, and I'm not necessarily opposed to it, I would throw out 45 days to split the difference. If we're going to move to a sort of time threshold goal, and we'd want to set ourselves up for success, presumably, not just voluntarily throw something out there that can't work or be successful, I think that, as I mentioned earlier, communicating better about leaks in the space where people communicate about leaks, i.e. Facebook, is critical. And I wonder if we're going to change and we're going to put a renewed focus in time, treasure, and talent on this, should we not consider resetting the list and having a new start date for new prioritization, new spending, new people, new equipment, and say, by God, we're going to start with this on, I'm picking one, May 15th, May 1st, June 1st, whatever, and starting on that day, here are the ways that you submit a leak into the city, the app, social media, like's been mentioned, and we just handle them, again, accepting things like Mazard, where there's a special valve or equipment needed. You just handle them as they come in. And the communication is very robust, and people can see, because it's all public, hey, this one was, tagged in and, at 6:37 in the morning on Monday, June the 1st. Well, that's the first one they're going to go out and tackle that day. And you knock that one out. And then you just, because I think the list, I think now is kind of a big beast. And so just a thought that crossed my mind that if we're going to do things really differently and put new attention on it, might we consider tallying differently? Thank you.
Director Settle.
I think Director Martin goes after him.
I think that this puts additional pressure on our discussion from a couple of weeks ago around allocations and how much money's coming out of water and sewer, streets, all those things to fund general fund activity. I think there's $9.1 million coming out of water and sewer going into general fund. we can find, my opinion, we can find dollars to fund all of this from that. Now, I'm not saying 9.1 million,
Right.
but could we get 2 million, 3 million, 4 million and not allocate those dollars to general fund? It means the general fund's going to have to tighten up. But can we find that? I would challenge Andy Richards to make that happen so that you get your equipment and so that we can fix these leaks and we can save. I agree with some of the folks that come up here and say we're wasting all this money. I've disagreed with you on the whole leak thing and how that works, because I think it's a lost, it's money that's going in the street is not going into the meter, and it's not, no one's paying for it. So I want to shore that up, because that solves our potential summer water issues, but it also allows additional revenue to come in because it's not leaking out in the street. It's going through the meter, and we're charging for it. So, and I would like to see us $4 million. Can we get that back into the water and sewer fund and not going into the general fund? That's what I'd like to see. And then you got your equipment, then you got your people. So that's what I'd like to see.
Director Martin, may I say something?
Sure.
And I think as you're sharing that stuff with us, Lance, would you mind, in your professional opinion, sharing with us what you believe, because this helps with goal setting, I think, a fully staffed and, refreshed equipment, what's your kind of expectation or belief that crew, that a crew should be able to accomplish in a week?
And
accepting things like weather and, blah, 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 blah.
But I actually asked two of my supervisors that last week, and I can tell you, they said 15 to 20 with the supervisors running the crews, and with 5 crews, so that's, each supervisor usually has 2 crews, so each crew can get, 2 a day, if you will.
And this is kind of like the run-of-the-mill.
Yeah, if everything goes right, we're not talking about snowmageddon, we're not talking about stuff like that slows down the crews. If we're looking at 15 to 20 so you're looking at 50 roughly, just say 50 a week for those 5 crews, fully staffed, fully functioning, you're looking at 200 leaks. And 300 to what? 300 or not 300?
I mean, 15 times 5 is 300.
Well, I was going by 4.
Oh,
So
same.
4 times 15.
Because 4 is the minimum. Because 4 is the minimum functionality of a crew, right?
Well, no, I'm thinking weeks in a month. I'm just doing weeks in a month. So if you got 20 in a week, 20, that's 200. If you got 15, that would be 300. So 300. I'm off. My math is
15 a week times 5 crews is 75 a week. Times 4 is 300.
right.
So that gets you to your goal.
And if you got 200, if you got 20 in a week, you're getting that, and that's them. Now, I will tell you that one complaint that you will probably hear then is, as we're repairing these, site restoration is going to take some time, but that's just going to take some time to get site restoration.
I'm concerned about the leak.
Okay.
Director Settle.
Thank you. A couple of things. So by board members, Neil brought it up, and I'm going to ask a question. Today, everybody uses a certain amount of water. Tomorrow, the same people use the same amount of water usage tomorrow. I snap my fingers right now, and every leak is fixed. Did I generate any more revenue?
Based on what I've heard in discussions, we save $11 million in the year.
I don't know if that's 100% accurate, but
Well, you wouldn't pay for leak repairs.
No. We don't get any more. However, we are not facing summer issues of potential.
Okay, wait. I asked the question is.
But I'm answering.
My answer was: do you generate any more revenue if I snap my fingers and the usage from today and tomorrow is the same? Do I generate any more revenue if I fix all the leaks today?
you're cutting expenses, not generating revenue.
That's correct. I'm cutting expenses. I'm cutting expenses.
And
That's all I'm doing.
we were told this 48-inch water transmission line is to account for
I'm not disagreeing with anything you're saying.
volume of water.
But
I mean, there's $150
But
million
I
we're
want us
paying
all
for this.
understand that water is the piece of the puzzle that we get for free. Water is rain, goes in the pond, goes to Lake Fort Smith. We treat it, pump it to our citizens, and they drink it. They use it, water, everything else. But if the usage is the same before and after all the leaks are fixed, you're not generating any additional revenue at that point. You're going to have a cost savings of electricity for the pumps, chemical costs, but you still got 2 operators running the treatment plant, the water treatment plant. That fixed cost is going to stay the same. So there's fixed costs that are staying the same regardless if every leak is fixed or not. You're going to save on the electricity cost of how much more it takes to pump the water from Lake Fort Smith or Van Buren to the tanks, because from the tanks it's all gravity flow.
Yes.
And the cost of the chemicals.
This is where I'm at, though. If we can't fix this by the middle of the year, I'm not voting for a water rate increase.
And the reason I'm bringing this up is this. My buddy Neil here and Levon in your previous spot talked about the debt service ratio. So if you don't have debt service ratio, you have the bond issuance. So you're going to change your denominator. If you don't increase revenues and you put more expense out there, you're changing your denominator. And you're going to make the debt service ratio even worse because you don't have increased revenues to offset the denominator of increased expenditures. That's what Director Good was talking about. I'm just a math guy. I'm not saying to say for or against this. I just want us to all understand this is it's a math equation. If you don't generate more revenue, but you put more expenses out there, to Lance's point, your debt service ratio is going to change. Correct?
Correct.
You're going to go down in debt service ratio. We did raise rates, and we spoke hopefully do that. But I didn't want everybody leaving here thinking if we save $3 million or 3 million gallons or 1 million gallons a day, we're going to gain X amount of revenue. Until the usage changed, if you had more people using water and they used more water than they used in the previous year, your denominator will be the issue. If I misspoke, please, Dre, am I misspoken?
Again,
Okay.
we are building a 48-inch water transmission line that's going to cost us $150 million.
And I think
And the premise of that was we're bumping up on maxing out our water in the summers.
In a few days a year.
A few days a year.
But we also
100%.
got a transmission line that's from 1947.
Right, and I'm not saying we don't resolve it, but does this allow us to push that off
I'm not saying
longer?
I'm not saying it can or can't. I'm just trying to speak the math, and I want us all to understand together that and what's going to happen with the water rate increase that we just passed, it happened before. Usage goes down. So your revenues are going to still go down because the usage, people use less water because they have a higher bill. And so I want us all to understand that together. It's a simple math algebra equation. Raise rates, water rates, people use less water, your revenues come down. If you have more expense out there, your debt service ratio goes down. Fixing all the leaks is what we need to do, not arguing that. But I just want to make sure we don't think that we're going to generate more revenue by fixing leaks.
Director Kasavitz.
I'd like to know how much money we're spending on chemicals that gets leaked, for water that gets leaked, and also how much money are we spending on having to replace, driveways or streets, or, I'm sure some people want their landscaping or irrigation replaced if those things are damaged from the leak. I mean, I imagine it's got to be quite a bit, because I look at
That's a fair question.
anecdotally, just our home, the cost to replace the landscaping, because it just sat in water continuously for over a year, just rotted everything out. And then, the irrigation system, and the lady I spoke with in Raleigh Farms, it was she's in a big estate. I mean, it's a big circle drive. I mean, that thing had to be expensive to replace.
No argument there, and those are good costs to get. We should get those as analysis of cost savings.
Yeah.
What do you save cost-wise, not revenue generated? That's
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Director Rego.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to ask my colleague, Director Kemp, some clarifying questions and make sure that I understood a statement that he made a moment ago about a pledge around a vote for something. Were you referring to sewer rate adjustments or potential water rate?
Thank you for the chance to clarify, because I'm trying to not elongate the conversation so we get to the other items too. Where my comment is last week during the sewer rate hearing, when we listened to the people, they asked us to look at cutting expenses where we can. And if we're going to raise their expenses for water rates in the future, having not done our due diligence off of the rate increase and not handling leaks, we're not showing that we are cutting expenses where we can, which I don't think you can cut it when you need new equipment, so that's not where you cut. You don't cut it on employees, that's not where you cut. The loss of actualizing water that we could have billed or just not utilized until it was ready to be utilized needs to be addressed. And so when, Director Settle asked, what are we gaining? What I want to gain is, before I ask a resident to raise their expense in the future for water, I want us to make sure we are cutting our expenses where we can. And the nuisance of no one likes to see water running down their street, and then it creates a conversation of, well, the city doesn't do their job, and that becomes an echo chamber. And I think we can change the positive tone by addressing these leaks. So why I'm advocating at the top of the year so much is I feel this water rate discussion creeping right behind the sewer rates, and I want us to show due diligence on this. And I would say the other thing is perhaps, and this is something I've advocated when we talked about the Utility Commission, and Lance, I think you do a great job. We have no boil notices populating out, fingers crossed as I said this, that you as a chemist, you're nailing it. Y'all are doing a great job. My question would be, do we need to look at elevating some sort of program for construction, water line, and Lance is juggling. I feel like every time I hear Lance in these meetings, it's like he's juggling all these balls, and I'm going, that's a lot on one guy. Should we be spreading this across a co-leader? Should somebody be alleviating? But those are questions we're not asking tonight, but that's where my brain is.
So for clarity, you were referring to staking out a position on proposed water rate adjustments in the future. You were not locking in a position around the sewer rate adjustment that's being contemplated next week.
Correct.
Okay.
I'm just saying what we've pitched to the federal government under our due diligence, which I know we're going to talk about in a minute. I have some recommendations, but where I'm at here is I want to do the work now. I don't want to wait till, procrastinating this down the agendas and we don't ever fix the leaks.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want you to understand, I'm not saying I'm not for leaks. I just want us all to understand the math equation, that's all.
Director Good and then Director Christina Casavage.
Thanks, Mayor. Lance, I've reported quite a number of water leaks over the years, and I know a percentage of them have been leaks on the customer side that they just have not fixed. So Director Kim was just talking about water running down the street, and no, that's not a good look. We also were talking about safety as it comes to, the water turning into ice, from people's, driveways or meters, but we need to try to repair that. So what does that look like where we have leaks on the customer side? And I look at one almost every day that I've reported a couple of years ago, and they just don't want to spend the money to fix it. They just rather let it run down the street, which causes, like Christina Casavas was saying, either more damage to the streets and other people's property. So how do we look at that, and where does that fit in this equation with water leaks?
So, and I will it's funny because we're looking into repairing water leaks, and I'm going to let Director Christina Casavas kind of
Yeah, I think that ties in with what we were talking about.
But there is, I believe, an ordinance that if for a structure, and I have to look this up, and it's a little different than what you and I have been discussing. If you came to me and I had a leak, and you're with the city, and you say, you have a leak on your side, again, I'm going by memory, let me look up the ordinance. We can actually tell them you have 7 days to fix it, and if you don't, we will shut your water off. Wow. Now, I will tell you, we have instituted a situation where someone had a horrible leak They were behind in their bill, and I can think of only one time that we shut water off, and we actually pulled the meter and cut the service so they couldn't do a straight. And I can be happy to tell you who that customer was after this, but the board actually voted to take that action, if I remember right. So to that end, I don't think 7 days. If you've tried to hire a plumber lately, and I know some of you have that I've talked to, I know Mr. Dingman has had that, getting a plumber in 7 days, unless it is an absolute emergency, is very difficult. I think a 30-day window. But here again, it would have to be a situation where the board allows enforcement of that ordinance. And that would be what we would do, is we would go and say, the leak is on your side. It's obvious. This is how we know. And it's almost the utility department would take on almost a neighborhood service type role in that, in which we would have to give a notice of that, and then a final notice, and then just shut the water off.
Well, just to elaborate on that a little bit, since Lance touched on it, I got a phone call this week from a resident. She's a renter, and she's a waitress, so she's not on fixed income, but her income's not real large, and she got a water bill for $1,700, and she couldn't afford to pay it. And the situation was the people she was renting from were supposed to fix the leak, and they didn't. So now she's looking at 2 months of these $1,700 water bills, and I thought, that's kind of a loophole. The renter is bearing all the responsibility for this, and so I asked Lance, is there something we can do to close this loophole? He's discussing it with our council right now to see legally how we can go about requiring a property owner to fix things for their tenant. I mean, because, theoretically she could take them to small claims court, but she couldn't afford to. And so I thought, and Lance said it happens more than you would think. And so I thought this is something that we need to look into, to protect people that don't really have the ability to help themselves in some of these cases. Before that, what I was going to say is I won't be voting for a water rate increase as long as I'm in this chair for the next 2 years. I voted for it the last time because we were talking about receivership and, when really if we could have hit our debt service coverage if we had cut out subsidizing those credit card processing fees, and that wasn't something that was ever presented to me as an option. So anyway, I know we talked a lot about that, but I just want to state my position. I'm not voting for another water rate increase. Thank you.
I just want to follow up with Christina. I know you have a comment too, but I agree with you. It would be great if we did have something solid where we could put the responsibility all on the property owner. But I want to say on the part of Lance's department, I've had several cases as well where the renter has complained about the water bill, and our department has actually spoken to and gotten money collected from the property owner. So thank you on your part.
So I would say in my situation, eventually the property owner did go out and fix it themselves. Yeah. And so she didn't have, a plumber bill to present. And so, she felt like she was going to kind of be stuck with that almost $3,400 in water. So we got it taken care of for her. But I just thought, going forward, that's a loophole we need to close. So I will be presenting something in the coming weeks for an ordinance to address that.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Mayor?
Yes.
I'd just like to make a motion that no later than March 18th, which I think is a regular voting meeting, if I'm not mistaken, and certainly can be sooner if it can be, but no later than March 18th, that a package of proposals or ordinances be brought to us for consideration, synthesizing what we talked about this evening, and certainly if there are further clarifications needed or more meat on the bone, let us know. But I'd like to see no later than March 18th something for us to vote on as it relates to putting a fresh oomph into our leak attack effort. So that gives you a touch over a month, if you need all of it, to develop something for us to consider. Because it sounds like it's a mixture of, some appropriations perhaps, some policy changes. And so I'd just like to sort of make the motion for that shell, that legislative shell, for something to be brought in front of us no later than March the 18th.
I'm sorry, just to let everyone know, I will not be here on the 18th. Sorry, so it's fine, I will have all that information ready, but I will
How
not
about
be able
April
to.
You
1st?
going to move it back to the next voting meeting?
How about April 1st? That's the first Tuesday.
Sure.
I'd second that.
Which date?
The first.
Of April 1st?
Thank you.
No fooling.
That is my anniversary with the city, by the way, is April 1st.
All right, very good.
Okay, at this point, we can take a 10-minute break, or we can go to 2B. And I think we've discussed most of that.
Yeah.
I think we discussed most of that, so why don't we go and take a 10-minute break?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 3 on the agenda is a discussion of the elements of the proposed financial plan for the consent decree, including sanitary sewer rates, the issuance of bonds, and the use of sales and use taxes to fund such bonds. As we get into this, the first component, as we've mentioned through the public hearing last week and the discussion that's pending, the consideration at next week's meeting is the adoption of a 3.5% increase to the sanitary sewer rates starting June the 1st, and then each January 1st from 2026 through 2030. This is a component of the first component of the plan that it's outlined in your packet on page 15, which summarizes the whole 10-year program that we're considering. Second important component is the issuance of sales and use tax bonds starting in 2025 to fund the first $360 million in consent decree sanitary sewer capital project obligations, as identified in that financial plan and also in the consent decree capital improvement program. And then the third component is the renewal and reauthorization of components of the city's sales taxes that we may use sales tax proceeds to fund the bonds needed for capital improvements as identified in the consent decree CIP. Currently, the city's voters have approved 2 cents in local sales taxes. The first penny is dedicated to streets, bridges, and associated storm drainage. The second penny is allocated to 25% to parks and fire, split evenly. And then 75% of that penny is allocated to the police department, equivalent to 1/8 cent, and to the funding of consent decree projects, equivalent to 5/8 cents. 5/8 of a cent, I'm sorry. The financial plan calls for the city to ask voters to approve reauthorizing this last component of 75%, just the same as it is, but allows the 5/8 piece of it to be issued for consent decree projects to be used to fund debt service of the $360 million in sales and use tax bonds mentioned above. In addition, the financial plan calls for the city to ask voters to reauthorize the 1 cent sales and use tax for streets, bridges, and drainage, and then divert 3/8 of that 1 cent to also be used to fund debt service for the sales and use taxes, for the sales and use tax bonds. This is a complicated discussion. I have a hard time getting it out to explain to you, but hopefully through this discussion we'll get it all out and leave here with an understanding of what that looks like. But then ultimately the goal here is to end up with a full penny, 1 cent sales tax that's dedicated to the consent decree that we can issue bonds against to fund the $360 million that we've contemplated for the first tranche of projects that need to happen. And then we have a second penny that's allocated 1/8 cent each to parks, fire, and police, and 5/8 of a penny to streets, bridges, and drainage to remain within our existing 9.5 cent local sales tax.
Okay, thank you. Is anyone going to speak on this?
We'll have,
Okay.
I mean,
Director Rigo?
for staff, just for clarification, for staff, Andy Richards will address any financial
Any questions?
questions.
Okay.
We also have Ms. Lauren Lowe with PFM. She's
Okay.
our financial advisor.
Okay, thank you for being here, ma'am. Director Rigo, you're recognized.
Okay, so it's a question to start the conversation. It's not necessarily one that I endorse, but I think it's something to be asked and answered. Is there any desire for, rather than reallocations and moving this and moving that, is there any desire for a fresh penny for a temporary amount of time completely dedicated to the consent decree? I think that's a question that has to be. Yes.
That's kind of where I was going to go with my discussion is, I'd look at a half penny and bond it with the 5/8 and make it 1 1/8. That's kind of what I was looking at.
So there are some.
The 5/8 is sitting there.
So there are some ideas that aren't just shuffling around.
Yeah, because if you think about it, you take the street tax, you're talking 30 years. I want us all to understand, if you bond anything out, it's like a house mortgage, you're talking 30 years. To generate the amount of money you need and the allocations, you're talking 30 years. What I don't want to do is take the street fund that does drainage work, fixes flooding, fixes our roads, and remove 3/8 of that for 30 years. I think that'd be devastating to our community. But I also know putting the rates on the ratepayers is not an answer either. I think I've been allocating this, you've heard me many times. Sales tax is the way to go because 50% of the sales tax is paid for people outside the city. And to me, taking a half penny additional instead of devastating the street fund and the drainage fund does give the voters an opportunity to say, we're going to dedicate 1 1/8 to consent decree, and then we can put part of my mind was put a covenants on it like we did with the last tax, something from 2030 to 2040, put a covenants on it so the voters approve that they know what their rates are going to be all the way to 2040. That's the only way I would do it, is put a covenants on top of what we did. That's just, you asked a discussion, there it is.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
My question for you is, you've talked about this before, but the talk was you have a sales tax increase rather than a rate increase.
I mean, you keep the 3.5% has to stay because that's what you told the EPA you'd do and the DOJ.
Okay.
But what I was going to get to is from 2030, the question came last time is, what happens at 2030 or 2031? What's the rates going to be? If you listen to EPA and DOJ, if we don't do anything at all, 20, 30, 40% is the number in 2031. I think that's the number we've heard. If you put something like a covenants like we did the last one and said from year 2031 to 2034, it's 0, and after that it's 3.5% to 2040, or 3% from up to 2040 at that point, then the voters know what their rates are going to be. It locks in what we're going to do, and it tells the voters, hey, for the next 15 years, half the sales tax, we're going to half that work, all the work will be done, but we're going to pay for it over the years. Just like house mortgage. You buy the house, and you got to pay over 30 years. That's what it's going to take. It's going to take a 30-year sales tax at a penny to pay it off, at minimum.
How much will that raise?
$900 million, $800, $900 million.
One penny in 30 years?
Well, $30 million a year for 30 years. $28 to $30 million a year. Rough estimates. I mean, if somebody wants to dispute that, I think that's the number, right, Andy? That's close what a penny gets?
I mean,
the spirit behind my question was that I personally am not necessarily opposed to the plan that was presented to us last week, but surely we're not just sitting here to say that we all agree or there's modest changes to the plan that exists from last week, or else we wouldn't have necessarily called this meeting. So I just wanted to encourage, if there were other ideas, that they come out in a relatively orderly and fast process.
Andy, how much does a penny generate today?
Well, in
Roughly 30 million.
In 2024, we have it calculated that it raised $29,916,302.
So a penny and eighth will gain us about $33 million a year. Over 30 years, 28 years, 25 years. It depends on what your rate is. If you get a good rate.
You're going to have some growth.
Yeah, growth.
Inflation.
Yep.
Factor that in, it's probably going to be $1 billion.
Yeah, and interest rates come down, it help out. I mean, that's where I'm at, is I don't want to devastate and hurt the street fund. I think it's done so much good for our community.
I mean, we also have to think about this, when this 3.5% is fully implemented, if in today's dollars, $7.5 million a year. It's in 2030. So if it's, I think you said last week, it's $1.5 million a year. Isn't that right? In terms of the 3.5% rate increase.
In terms of additional revenue year over year.
Yeah, additional revenue.
Yes.
Yeah. So $1.5 million a year times 5 years, it's $7.5 million. And that's if there's no growth or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just $7.5 million.
And that plays into factor.
That's $30 million at the end of into 2030. So I mean, you've got to balance that in there, that additional revenue that's coming in.
That's correct.
With this.
But
So I don't think you need 30. I don't think you need a penny.
Well, I'm using a penny and an eighth. That's half a cent. You could go to 3/8 and make it a full penny.
I might say if that full penny would be used for debt service on bonding these projects, it may end up being shorter than that, because when it starts generating more than what you anticipated on the front end, it starts paying off the bonds on the back end.
Yeah, maybe you don't go 30. Maybe it's 28 or 25 years.
I mean,
I-
it lasts as long as it takes to pay the debt
right.
service, but that debt service, even if you plan on it being 30 years, with accounting for growth in the sales tax, then potentially that comes back down to 28, 27.
I know there's this
25.
fear by the magic number 10. We all got to take a step back, and do we want to put the burden on our citizens, or half the burden on the visitors of our city? And to me, that's where I'm at. Is the burden with all these visitors coming, FMS, we're the hotbed community, everybody comes to work here, shop here, eat restaurants here. Do we want the burden spread apart on half the citizens, or do we put it all on the ratepayers? And to me, I do not want to put it on any more ratepayers. They're devastated already, what we did. So to me, the sales tax is the way to go. You can put it to construction projects. The 3.5% helps cover the debt service in the future. I don't want debt services. I love the pay-as-you-go. To do that, that's even astronomical. You can't fathom the pay-as-you-go. That's kind of where I started my numbers.
Just if I might, and address a little bit of what you said about restricting future rate increases based on that. I mean, we don't know what the economy will look like 6 years from now. And so,
I understand.
maybe if there's a CIP sort of adjustment from year over year.
I think we got to get creative on what we tell the voters, because we did it and it worked well. The voters knew that we said 0% for 3 years, 3.5% after that. We told the EPA that. We've stayed in meetings where the EPA said, we need higher debt. And we said, nope, we told the voters this, and we held our ground. And we're going to do what we told voters we're going to do. We're going to keep it at 3.5. If we can do something in 2030 to 2040 and give some leeway, I'm fine with that. But I don't want to do is have the voters vote for a sales tax and turn around and have a 30% rate increase in 2035. That is the wrong message. So we got to put a covenant on there.
Director Kemp?
Even to that point, I'd like to ask Director Settle on this. Do you see that we can just, two questions. Do you see that we could do early payoff? In other words, if we meet it, can we get out of it, earlier than trying to keep it over the community as long as we thought it would take?
Yes.
And the other question is, can this also address not just consent decree, but could it address our water line, transmission line?
It would only, you can only, I mean, if you don't have enough to do the $650 million work from what we got from Lance.
So it's just consent decree?
It's just consent decree.
We've got some congressionally directed spending for the water transmission line. I thought it was $12 million a year. My understanding was that we could ask for it every year. I mean, and that was from Bozeman's office. Womack's office was looking at doing 4 to 5 in addition, and we never attached a project to it. So I mean, we need to be asking whether we get it or not. We need to be asking because that's a big chunk every year.
And lead to your questions. Yes, we should pay it back off. I'm willing to listen to any options. If citizens have gotten options, and can show how we can pay it off, but you got to realize that if you bond work, has to be done through a sales tax or through rates. That is a state law. So you can't just say we're going to go get money from this place and this place. You got to either have a sales tax or rates to bond work. That's correct.
So then my next thought would be, in the process that you see, what is a timeline of even evaluating from the community and the public on how we can gauge people's interest on this?
Well, unfortunately, you're up against two things. The state law changed a couple years ago by some of our legislators that only allows us to have 2 elections per year, May and November. So, and we have the current revote for the street tax. It's up, and this has to happen this May or it goes to 0. So the street tax revote's happening this May. So, if you wait on anything else, it'll be November.
So do you see, if I hear you saying that we continue forward with this special vote, but that you're advocating for November?
I'm actually advocating for maybe what Director Rigo advocated for, is to ask everything, because it's easy to tell us it's easy for people to say where the savings is at. I come grab the budget, show me where we can get the money to do it. It's not as easy as saying you generate $1.5 million for 30 years. you're not going to generate the amount we're going to do to finish. All I heard for the past couple months is, let's finish the consent decree. How do you do it? You got to bond it, do the work in 10 to 12 years, and pay it off after that. Just like we did Lake Fort Smith. We did all the work for Lake Fort Smith, and we paid it off for another 10 years after it was done. Same principle applies here. So to me, either we ask the voters now for diversion, or we ask the voters for something new, or we just ask the voters to up what we got and ask for something later.
A few other things for throw over to my colleagues who listen. There were 3 things I wrote down earlier in the night for this item. There were 2 were just on our slide deck that we did create and push out. I wonder if we can also push this through social media and things that I heard, Josh, that we just didn't answer because we prepared it, we heard them speak, and when I listened, one was an additional slide on why streets and not parks, because parks doesn't have any really money to pull from because of the percentage that it's taking from the sales use tax. But there was a lot of discussion about why aren't we pulled from the parks? Why don't we pull it from but the parks doesn't generate the revenue. And I think if we could create something to explain that in really good, simple terminology would be helpful. 2 is someone said, what work was done before the consent decree? And I think that this board, I've watched over the year prior to being on the board, that y'all been doing work, and that was a part of this. We're making progress. We need more time. But before the consent decree, like back in the history log, before all this got real down to paper, how many things were really being done versus now?
That was the $200 million figure.
But that was it, right? And I think
that was
to
equalization
show the action that's been created
equalization basins and some of those other things.
So I just think it'd be good to show progress, is what I'm saying.
And
that there was a time where nothing was happening. The board moved into action. The board is active. I think that would be a good slide deck addition. And then the last thing I was going to mention is, I really think, especially if we're talking about the sales tax, that's why I wanted to mention these 3, a infrastructure website that you could go to that says this is what was done. It's in a code map, like I think of Stan Snodgrass has in the engineering department. They had a whole map in my orientation, and they showed colors all over the map. These are the streets that we're going to have to get to in time. They had them graded in different ways. But if we could show an interactive site with a dashboard that shows a ticker on sales tax generated, projects being contracted, projects paid for, a color lay, of what's to come and the work progress to be done, I think it would help us tell the narrative. And so those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Director Rigo and then Director Neil Martin.
Thank you, Mayor. So, obviously, step 1 next week is the consideration of the implementation of the 3.5% sewer rate adjustment plan. And I think, I don't, perhaps there's questions, but I think that's just a decision that will get made one way or the other next week. As it relates to the reallocations or the potential issuance of new sales taxes to help address some of this stuff in the long term, Jeff, I want a refreshment. You had mentioned last week, I believe, that for the street vote, the street tax vote, the existing tax, that renewal vote in May, that there's a deadline coming up soon for action on that. What is that?
That's correct.
Deadline?
For any ballot question to be on the May 13th special election, we have to have an ordinance in place and approved and to Sebastian County before March the 4th. So that's our deadline. It's essentially through the month of February here, we have to make this decision and forward something for them.
And I'm not advocating for this, but is it a situation where it's kind of like, postmarked by, like if we met on March the 3rd and passed something, is that, considered being done by March the 4th?
As long as it can be done and buttoned up into the county by the 4th, yes.
So it's actually a completion deadline on their end as well. Like we have an obligation to provide a work product, but they in turn have an obligation to actually, do the technocratic election management stuff they need to do. Okay. So my second question is, the state law I know the conversation around you can have an election in May and then the other election is in November. Does the law change totally preclude additional elections, or is it just you have to pay for them more?
No, we have to pay for them anyway.
Sure.
And so it reduces the amount of special election. I mean, initially you could call them for whenever you could muster them, and then it was reduced to only 4 per year, and now it's only 2.
Right,
Okay,
so it's 2023.
Okay, so it's a complete prohibition. Okay. So presumably the same deadlines would hold if we were trying to have an additional thing for May, et cetera. So what is the approximate deadline? Is it a similar back into for November? You would need to do something by
It's a specific number of days, yes.
Yeah, so many days.
70 days.
70
Okay.
days.
So, I mean, it is a very urgent consideration that, we'll have to have for, because obviously, I think, and I agree with Director Settle's points earlier, I mean, I think obviously wish for the street and drainage tax that's been collected for a number of years and does fantastic work. And we obviously wish for that to continue. So there's, legislative work that has to be done on that. And then, I mean, we have to come fairly quickly to the juncture point of, are we just going to reprogram, some of that money, or are we going to try to find a new, temporary revenue generation on the tax side for this consent decree work? And so I just wanted those deadlines again, Jeff, so we could be mindful of them. Thank you.
Director Good and then Director Kemp.
Just a couple of comments. Thank you, my colleagues, for all the comments, and definitely plenty to think about. I want to start out with a couple of comments that Director Settle made. I absolutely agree with you about using a tax opposed to, higher rates. But my first comment has always been, when we're talking about these water issues, that we should, as consumers, what we pay should cover the cost of that product and operations. We should cover that. Secondly, I think you made the statement that if we took money from, if we took that percentage of money from the street funds, it would devastate the work done, or not necessarily the work that has been completed could be. But, I'm not a big fan of taking a percentage of that fund, only because I see the amount of good work that is done, particularly on the north side. But, to be honest, it doesn't really, what matters is what the citizens are willing to do. Citizens are willing to do. If they're willing and understand that we generate, more money outside of bringing in people from outside the city, putting in money on a sales tax, it would be better than the rates. But for me, we think about paying off some of this stuff, like $8-9 million of consent decree. But Christina was talking about the transmission line work may or not be funded, but we also have other work like the Mazard station, the Mazard projects. I think that's like $29 million. So what Jeff was speaking to, when we're talking about paying something off early, I don't know if it's really going to be early or not if we still have all these extra things that we need to pay for. You know what I'm saying?
That's only if we issue debt.
Debt service?
Right, debt service.
That's it.
Director Neil Martin.
I don't know if I'm sold on the increased sales tax at this point. So I want to have maybe some discussions on that. But we kind of switch gears a little bit. The federal government has said, we want you guys to front load some of these projects, which means that's why they're wanting us to bond out $360 million this year in 25.
Well, at least starting this year. We've had this discussion, we wouldn't be able to do all of the 360 million because we couldn't spend it that fast if we tried. We have there's a 3-year spend down. You have to spend the money down within 3 years whenever you issue debt. So we likely wouldn't go that fast, but we would likely go at least 2, maybe 3 issuances to get to that total of 360.
Okay, okay, I see. So what is the process in which, well, first off, I'm not a big fan of taking on debt, but what is the process for doing this?
Who are you asking?
I guess that would be Andy.
Andy or Lauren looks like she's ready to go.
Yeah, either one.
Hi, good evening. Lauren Lowe with PFM Financial Advisors. The process starts with the Board of Directors and seeking the process to go through holding the election in which the voters would have to approve the issuance, the sales and use tax debt, and that we can also pledge it to debt service.
Okay, so that would be in the language of the ordinance, or the language of what goes to the voter.
Correct.
So we'd have to say, for ease sake, 5/8 cent goes to consent decree, or reallocation of that 1% street, bridges, and drainage tax to 5/8 here, 3/8 here. If we went that route, that would be to the board, or that would be to the citizens, and the language would say for the issuance of bonds.
Yes, that's one of the uses. You could also potentially use it for PAYGO. So we would want to make sure it's flexible enough that you could use it in multiple ways, but it's for those particular projects. It has to say for debt payments, or you cannot borrow against it.
Okay. Right now, I believe we have, say, $158 million in bonds today. Is that correct? After 24? I mean, they are
utility debt.
They are revenue bonds, right? Are we in agreement on that? Okay. So I know we've had some things brought to us that are saying we're, $500 million, $800 million in debt or whatever. But in reality, we have $158 million that we owe to someone for bonds, existing bonds, right? And that's it. That's all we owe, because we paid down $125 million in sales tax bonds. So we don't have any sales tax bonds currently. Okay. So one of the things that was really interesting to me with the revenue bonds is this 110% debt ratio, this debt coverage ratio, that we have to maintain. We have to be over 110%, or the bondholders, we're not meeting our obligation to the bondholders.
That is correct.
Right. So we have to have 110% of revenues allocated. Or explain it.
Sure. So you factor in operating revenues less operating expenses, and what's left over to make your debt payments.
Okay.
So bondholders are expecting you to have more than enough to pay them because for unforeseen circumstances, whether it's a disruption in collection or a disruption which causes an unexpected expenditure. So 110 is the bare minimum that you could attract investors.
So that's revenue minus expenses.
Operating expenses, not depreciation. So true money in, money out to operate the system.
And we have to have basically maybe $20 million right now, and that meets our 110% threshold.
That sounds about right, but I have. Yeah.
Oh, what's that?
You need 22 to get to 110%.
Okay.
Because our debt service is roughly 19 million right now, so.
Right. And our debt service is roughly around 20 million, right, in 24? Okay.
Yeah, 19 to 20 million.
Okay. So that was obviously something that I learned through this whole process. Is there anything like that with sales tax bonds? Is there anything that are there any criteria? Is there anything that me as a board member needs to know, that the citizens need to know about taking out debt that are financed by bond or financed by sales tax that could get me into trouble, or could get the board into trouble, that we'd have to issue, we'd have to cut expenses, we'd have to raise revenue? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
You can take it if you want. All right, well, I mean, we're pledging the sales tax revenues. There's no, we're pledging what the voters approved. There's no requirement to go back and raise sales tax. There's nothing like that.
So there's
It's
no.
based upon the fact that the sales tax, as long as it generates enough revenue to make the bond payments,
Okay. Well,
So
Okay,
there's no
so-
coverage. I mean, you can calculate coverage, but the sales tax issues that we've done in the past never had a rate covenant about maintaining certain debt service coverage like we have in the revenue bonds for water and sewer.
okay. But you just said that it's got to generate enough to pay the bond payment.
Yeah.
Right. And do we know what, I mean, have we ever had, when we had those bonds in 2014, did we ever have a scenario where we didn't have enough, we weren't taking in enough to?
We had plenty. We actually paid them off early because
Okay.
we actually, with sales taxes, we're doing more than projected. And so, there were mandatory redemptions on those sales tax issues where whatever extra we collected each year, we actually paid bonds off early.
Okay. All right. So, okay, if there's anything that's going to potentially cause issues, I would want to know about it, because this, I mean, I'm not an expert in this stuff, but I've gained a little information. That 110% was something that was, I mean, obviously it came up in the last year or two, that I wasn't fully aware of it, and maybe that's just my lack of education on the whole thing. So I want to make sure that there's nothing there that, do you have something you want to say? Yes, yeah, I want to hear that.
One thing that I think might be helpful for you to consider, to use a data point that was shared earlier, the 1% generates $29 million. If we were in a position where we had authorization to borrow against that 1% today, and we said we thought the city could actually spend all the money it generates, that's not the point. I, in good faith, would not tell the city to borrow up to that $29 million in revenue per year, because if something happens, you've leveraged yourself to 100%. You do not have enough coverage. So what we factor in is we look at the historical revenue, historical sales and use tax revenues. We also factor in unforeseen events, a disruption of just people stop spending money at the cadence that they're spending it, and you back it off a little bit. That does, to that point, it's always benefited the city. To Andy's point, they were able to pay off the sales and use tax debt early because the revenues came in higher than the estimated debt service.
What are we anticipating our payment to be, our bond payment to be, our yearly bond payment?
Well, one thing is I think that we would take the position that you phase it in over time to get to the $360 million number. Just for a reference point, we had it at $25 million a year.
$25 million a year?
I think that's right. If you just bear with me, I'll look real quick.
Okay.
It was more like $24 million a year.
24?
But that's at current market rates.
Okay. So it'd be $24 million a year, and then, if it's $360 million, that's how many years out was that?
30.
30 years. Okay, so that was 30 years. Okay.
Lauren, and some of your calculations, though, you also have a debt service reserve. You might.
That is correct, yes. So another safety net is that we fund on the front end, about 5% goes into a fund that if there was a disruption in collections, even like on a month-to-month basis, something, the city could tap into it first, pay a debt service payment, and then fill it back up as excess revenues came in. So there's a couple of safety nets to ensure that we're not leveraging the city up to 100% of the estimated revenues to come in.
Okay.
And so that's an important thing, though, because when we talk about $360 million in sales and use tax bonds, when you get to the whole cost of issuance, that debt service reserve, that 5%, was it
$18 million.
$18 million. That gets added, so the 360 plus the 18 plus the cost of issuance costs. So when we're talking in the neighborhood of 385 million total.
That's actually the number.
That's actually the number, but remember 18 of that is actually, we can actually use that to, on the back end when everything gets paid off, that actually can go against the debt and paid off that much earlier.
And then,
if you follow what I'm saying.
And then in 2031, we're doing this again, according to this plan.
Potentially,
And
yes.
And is that what did we communicate to that to the EPA, or did we only communicate our plan through 2030?
We gave them this whole sheet because we are asking for a 10-year extension, so we had to show them what we plan to do over the course of that 10 years to address the consent decree sewer issues that they know of, but also they know of our other obligations also.
Okay.
And so, so that everything is on there, water and sewer and everything.
This is kind of separate, but one of the things I wanted the board to be aware of and the citizens that are here. Cindy Crawford reached out to me last night. She had a meeting with the governor today, and she wanted to help with the consent decree as much as possible. So I put together a kind of a synopsis the things that our citizens have been have faced and have basically dealt. How the citizens have stepped up and paid all this over the course of time. I know Jeff provided a little bit of information, but so she had her meeting today with Governor Sanders, and the hope is, I know Director Rigo mentioned this. We've been through a Trump administration already, but I think this is a different Trump administration, and my hope is that information gets to Secretary Zeldin and Trump, and maybe there's some flexibility we've got. But I think we need to continue pounding that road in Little Rock and that connection up to the president and the EPA administrator, and see if there can be some kind of flexibility that we can have. So, I mean, I think we need to use every opportunity in front of us. So I just wanted you guys weren't aware of that. I wanted to make y'all aware of it, and I think we need to continue. And I sent that to all of our legislators as well. So what Jeff tagged onto my email, I sent that to Jay Richardson. I sent that to Zach, our whole, even Ryan Rose, who represents a part of Fort Smith. I'll send it to the board. So just know that that's out there. I don't know if it's going to do anything, but I think it's not going to hurt. It's not going to hurt.
I think it was a good gesture to do that. That's good work. Director Rigo, you were next in the queue.
Thank you, Mayor. Obviously, step one is, handling with a vote next week the sewer rate adjustment that's contemplated. But I mean, even just based on the conversation tonight, when you talk about a March 4th deadline, we have one more regular meeting, that's next Tuesday, prior to that deadline, to give the county the time to do the electoral filing and paperwork and all that. And I mean, it seems to me we're just, not even hearing, even kind of baseline enthusiasm around reallocating money from, streets and bridges and drainage. I mean, and perhaps we would take an informal tally on that, but there's been some pushback on it. And so, I wonder if both in the sense of practicality and realism, but also in a continued demonstration, I don't think it's not a demonstration of good faith. If there's just, we make the vote to, put the election for a straight up renewal of the tax as it exists for, streets, bridges, drainage, and the other items that, we're currently seeking a renewal for, and we just work diligently and demonstratively towards the fall filing deadline, if you will, for an additional temporary tax revenue source that goes completely to the consent decree. I mean, personally, and I can't imagine, and if I remember conversations in the past over the years on the consent decree as it relates to the EPA and DOJ, there has not ever not been a thirst for us to find dedicated revenue streams that go towards that. And so I just wonder if again, for practicality and realism purposes, I mean, is it perhaps better to just, put forward for people's consideration in May a renewal of what exists as it exists, and work towards a conversation in the fall about something dedicated specifically to consent decree needs. But again, it seems like I've heard Director Settle mention not wanting to see the street bridge stuff reprogrammed. Director Good, I believe, mentioned something to the same. I am certainly concerned about what could happen. I don't think you ever want to get into a war, if you will, metaphorically speaking, amongst types of infrastructure. Well, let's hollow out a little bit of this type of infrastructure to go towards this other type of infrastructure, because what happens if something happens catastrophically with a bridge or a road? Everyone's going to say, well, that's what you took away from that fund, and this is what happens. And causation does not always equal causality, but we live in politics where sometimes that's an edict. And so I think it's worth hearing from the rest of us as to how we feel, just given the time crunch and the deadline. How do you feel about reprogramming streets and bridge?
I might add, just before we delve off into that, is that the state law allows us to issue up to 3 cents local sales tax. We have issued up to 2. We have issued the 2 right now. We still have that 1 that is available, and any portion thereof to consider.
Well, and that, to me, I think if we looked at something in the fall, you would want the fullest, broadest possible conversation ahead of that September filing deadline. Hey, folks, here are the options. Some are longer, some are shorter, some are bigger, some are smaller. But the conversation then would be around not a reallocation. It would be, no, this is all going to be dedicated to the consent decree, just kind of how long and at what rate, are the options to consider. And so, that's good to know, Jeff, what the parameters are. And, my question remains about how are, some others feeling about the reprogramming.
Okay. Director Settle, you were next.
Thank you. Oh. Christina can go. I'll wait.
Go ahead and go, and then Director Settle.
Well, I'll speak to that. I think that, we know when these elections are, and we always come right up to the deadline every time. I don't know that I want to waste another 7 or 8 months. We could always call a special meeting if we need to, but it seems like every time these discussions come up, we're always trying to get things in right before the deadline, and I'm afraid we'll put it off for 6 or 7 months, and that's what'll happen again. I don't know that the quality of the conversation would be any better in the fall. My question, I guess for Andy, is have we looked any more into the WIFIA loans?
You want to talk about? Well, she's looked at the WIFIA loans for us. I'll let her answer.
Yeah, so the WIFIA loan program is fantastic. It does require a 51% match. So for them to step in and provide loan dollars, pretty much the city has to show that you have an equal share in the projects. At where you're at with your debt service coverage and the operating revenues available to support debt service, I do not believe that the EPA would be supportive of approving that loan obligation without seeing that there were sufficient revenues to pay for that WIFIA loan. They would not factor in like sales and use tax. It has to be system revenues available to pay them back.
Okay. The EPA is the one that mentioned it to us.
Yeah,
that's why I was curious. And then I know that when Director Morton was here, he talked a lot about reissuing the bonds from, was it 2018? Is that factored in anywhere?
We did. So we have factored in, so that would be available to the city in 2028. So we have a little bit of time to wait to see if it makes sense. And I do want to flag that is completely based on interest rate environment at that point.
Okay.
But the good news is assuming that opportunity still prevails from the federal tax position, so it's tax exempt debt. So assuming that's still available for us to use in 2028, the difference is that debt that was originally 30 years is now 20-year debt, so it's shorter. So in theory, it should work out, but we can never guarantee. We did make some baseline assumptions when sharing the financial plan with the EPA, because we thought they may ask that question too. We did use current market conditions to say, this could generate some additional savings for the system.
What was the situation with those bonds? Because I know Director Morton, referred to them as, kind of a bad deal or bad bonds. Was it the interest rate or the terms were less than standard?
I think he thought it was a long call period. I think that the
Yeah, which
10-year
is actually
window-
standard in the market is a 10-year par call. You can get some, meaning you can refinance them within at the 10-year point. If you do something shorter than that, so if you want the ability to pay them off or refinance them shorter, it does cause an interest rate increase. So we tried to strike the right balance of, okay, this is current market. Their rate was actually pretty attractive in 2018. We hit, obviously, interest rates hit rock bottom in 2020 and 2021. We're back up to, we're actually higher than 2018 at this point.
Okay.
I think we have a lot of information to figure out as we evolve through the federal government changes that we're living through.
Okay, thank you. I
Sure.
appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Director Settle, and then Director Kemp, and then Director Neil Martin.
Neil don't need to go. He spoke enough tonight. All right, just for the board, just to give some food for thought here. $30 million is what we're just saying is a penny. 3/8 is $11.25 million. So if you diverted 3/8 of the street tax to the consent decree, you're going to give up $11.25 million of street and drainage work for the next 25, 30 years. So the question is, what projects will we give up? Because that's, to me, what we're going to have a discussion about. That's a lot of money, and that's a lot of paving roads, a lot of houses to be bought, a lot of flood mitigation. It's not like we have this tax and we're paving, roads of gold, as some people said in the media. We're doing basic fundamental work of drainage work, street works, flooding control. So then my next question for Lance is, Lance, how many sewer customers do we have? Rough estimate.
Rough estimate's going to be around 32 to 33,000.
Okay, so let's say, so you take the 11.25 million, and you divide it by 33,000 customers, divided by 12 months. If you went rates alone, everybody's rate would go up $29
Per month?
per month to cover the $11.25 million that you would need to bond or to have a penny's worth of
That's
money.
just a sewer rate.
That's just the sewer
Not
rate.
water, nothing else.
That's sewer. If you decided not to do anything, you said you take the 5/8 and you wanted to go with rates on top of that. That's what it would be. That's simple math. $28.40, $29.
To make up what?
To make up the, if you didn't divert.
Okay.
So then the question becomes is, I think diverting $11.2 million out of the street fund would be devastating. We do a lot of good work with repaving roads. You go up to other cities in our state, they look great where all the traffic is at. But you go 1 mile on either side of that interstate up northwest Arkansas, they have major road construction issues. Some cities up there bond their road construction work and they're still paying off, and they can't do future work because they're still paying off the bonds. We pay as we go, which I love. So I don't understand, I understand people looking at it, but to me, $28.40 more is not acceptable to my citizens. Asking for a half a penny more is. Because you know what? It takes a lot of money at a half a penny to make up $28.46 in taxable income. And that's, to me, is an equation. I get your thoughts of you don't want to go to that magic number, 10, make it 9.78. If you want to make it just a penny, make it that. Ask for 3/8. But I can't imagine us in 10 years going, man, I wish I had more street funds. We kind of get behind the 8 ball. That's what will happen. If you take that much money out, you're going to start getting behind the 8 ball. You're not going to pave roads every 30 or 40 years. You're going to pave roads every 40 or 50 years. And there's some work that won't get done. And to me, that's the hard question we've got to ask ourselves is a half a penny or 3/8 of a penny extra on taxable income that gets paid for by a lot of visitors easier to swallow than to do this? Because all I've heard for the past since September is we need to fix consent decree. We need to get it done, get it off our back. So the rubber's hitting the road. If somebody can do a math equation and show me how to do it, I'm all ears. But you heard from a bond counsel, it's got to be sales and use tax, or it's got to be rates. And I think diverting the tax, I heard some whispers when that was brought up a couple meetings ago, got booed out of the wall work. So I'm asking the board, if you've got an answer, but $30 million for 30 years and tell me how you get there.
Well, and I think it's an open question as to whether or not, a majority of people participating in an election in the voting booth would vote to hollow out, or to significantly reduce.
I wouldn't touch that tax, because if you chance to lose that tax, then you're devastating the community more. That's my 2 cents. Thank you, board, for allowing me to speak.
Director Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor. The more I've listened to these, the one question I did write down was, and just kind of marrying ideas I hear across this table tonight, can the ballot ask for both options? That's one question I have of 3. I'm just asking. I don't think that's a good approach. I'm not advocating, but I'm just, if we really want to know if the public doesn't want us to wait till November, can we throw that up there, or is that confusing to the public? I mean,
That's a good question.
is the ballot machine smart enough that if you vote on one, that it wouldn't show you the other, or can you, those are thoughts that I have questions of. That's one. May not stand to be answered, I guess.
Do you have the answer, Sherry?
Can we ask for both options?
Like, can you have multiple items?
In years past, that was presented. Jeff, you probably explain it much better than I.
I'm not sure I'm going to go the same place you were going,
Okay.
but I don't think so. I think we have to put forth, as similar as the ballot titles that were in your packet, I think we have to put forth a ballot question, and it has to have a yes or no answer in terms of an issue like this. And I don't think it can be, if no, then would you rather do this one as a yes? I'm not sure I've followed your
Director Kemp, if I may, but that's not necessarily the question. Please correct me. The question sounds like, are you able on the special election day of May the 13th to present more than one question to the public to vote on?
Yes, that is my question.
Yes. Oh, yes.
That's my question.
We've got 3 different ones on this section. Yes.
But my comment would be, and because I'm sympathetic to the idea that taking from streets and drainage is going to cost us in a compound effect. It's kind of the law of unintended consequences that we talk about in leadership. But I'm also sympathetic to the idea that I don't know about kicking it to November when the people are saying, just let's make some decisions, but put it back to the voters. Voters, like, what do you want? We know they're probably going to want roads and streets and drainage. The question then is, okay, we need more funding. Do you advocate that we do the pulling it from this tax you just voted to renew, or would you like to see, the additional tax? That's just the one thought. The other thought is, with changes at the federal level that we're seeing right now, can we get more than 10 years? That's been this equation that we're all rushing around. And the other question is similar to it. Can we negotiate more? And when would we even hear back from them? Have we heard back from them? It sounds as if that things have been, quiet in that regard. And I just come back to as well, even more so, which the only thing I could think about why I would be maybe open to just say renew it and then do a better job in November is I do think there's some need of a website that tells a story in great, simple fashion for an everyday person. So those are just my thoughts, but thank you for your time.
Director Neil Martin.
I'll make it brief. As of right now, I'm for reallocating. I'm for lessening the streets sales tax and offering the 3/8 to consent decree. The reason being is when we sat down with folks last week, we presented out a plan, and now we're adjusting that plan. And I know that plan was about rates, but we also talked about this particular issue. To me, that causes, I think it's not what we told them, and that causes me pause. I would like to minimize the impact to people as much as possible, knowing that half the people are going to pay this that are coming from outside, but 100% of us are going to pay it. And I want to try to minimize that as much as possible. So as of right now, I would not be for going over 9.5%, which is just another tax on our folks here. So that's where I say right now.
Director Martin, a question for you. Would you be amenable to the idea of not approving this part of the financial plan, but renewing the tax as it stands for a further consideration to come back to the public in the year later in the year?
You talking the 1% sales tax?
Just saying the proposal that Director Settle has proposed being brought in November so that there's plenty of time, and not taking from streets and drainage, but also just because we haven't heard from the federal saying we need more time to explore this. Are you open to a later vote?
Maybe, with full transparency with the citizens so that they know what's going on and what's in front of them. I'm sure Mr. Tilley and our Southwest Times will communicate this out, but sometimes people miss that stuff. So as of right now, I mean, they saw a 3.5% rate increase. That's it. Now they're seeing 3.5% rate increase and maybe a half a penny sales tax. That's
Well, the difference being, of course, that we control the rates, they control the taxes, the people. I mean, we make rate adjustments or have the ability to make rate adjustments, but a tax decision would be one made by the public.
what else is on the ballot in November? That's what I hate about.
There's nothing in the ballot in May. There's nothing in the ballot in May.
Right, I know
This is an off cycle.
Those off.
But that's
those off. I don't know what do you call them? Those off season. It's most of those sales taxes pass.
But the sales tax.
They just do.
The
That's
street
just the way
tax,
the numbers work.
Street tax has to pass in 2025 because it was allocated in 2015, so it has to be passed in 2025. That has to happen.
So Director Martin, if I could, just one more question to trying to assess what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Do you not have any concerns about pulling from the streets and drainage?
No, I do, but I also say at some point I've got to make some decisions. And is the decision always raising more revenue, or is it reallocating what we've got? That's kind of where my thought process is.
Okay, I think Director Christina Gustavus and then Director Rigo.
Well, I would say, when I opened my business, the sales tax rate was at 9.75%, and then as I've been open, it's gone down to the 9.5%, and no one has noticed the difference. I'm in a retail environment just about every day, so just, something to think on. And I'm not saying that I think it needs to go to 10, but I'm just saying people mentally are rounding up to 10, when they're looking at what they're going to spend. So, I think there may be a little bit of wiggle room there.
And I think, were there any other comments? Director Rigo?
Well, what about this? And this is obviously activity for next week, or the next voting meeting, which is next week. But, obviously we handle the sewer rate thing because that is a decision that we make as an entity, a governing entity. And then to Director Kemp's point about the ability to consider multiple things in an election, we could make the decision to refer to the voters for their consideration the renewal of the streets tax that needs to be handled no matter how we reallocate it or don't reallocate. So that has to be handled next week regardless because of deadlines. And then we put for consideration also in May on the same ballot, a sum to be determined and worked out amount of new revenue to go towards the consent decree, but that we pledge, on or before April 15th or so, sort of a month before that election, that we pledge to have an up or down vote on a reallocation and efficiency package as it relates to spending in our the spending that we control in our departments, and all the things that we've talked about in the abstract of efficiencies and find this and do this and shuffle this. I mean, not to be rude, and it's not meant to be rude, but let's put up or shut up. Let's vote on something. Let's do it a month before the election, and then you have a month to say to people, hey, here's the new and deliberate and conscientious and considered belt tightening that we did. We did a whole package. We did a big vote in early to mid-April. Now we're asking you to consider doing this to help with the needs that we all are recognizing about the consent decree. And so, I mean, I think we talk about, phrases like we need to make decisions and things like this get said. Well, the only way that that generally tends to happen is some deliberate deadlines and things like this. And so, I mean, I would be in support of something like that. But either which way, we are going to have to decide a tax ballot question next week just because of the deadline.
Director Good.
Thank you, Mayor. You're absolutely right on the deadline. Just as a reminder, I'm sure we don't need to be reminded, but we gave the DOJ and EPA a timeline for a vote in May, and if we don't follow that, that could actually look bad upon us.
Director Settle.
To my fellow citizens and fellow board members, just remind us that we are one of a few cities in the state of Arkansas that does not have a prepared food tax. Some states and some cities in Northwest Arkansas have 2 to 3% prepared food tax. We don't have one. So, when people hear about sales tax, those other costs when you go to restaurants up in our favorite cities up in Northwest Arkansas or across the river or down south of us or over to the capital that have a restaurant tax. 3% is the max they do. So I just want to remind that, people talk about sales tax. We only get 2 pennies, to Jeff's point. Streets is a penny. Street and drainage is a penny. 5/8 consent decree. Parks, fire, and police get 1/8 apiece. That's all. The rest of it is a state tax.
State tax.
And I'll just remind the board, a few years ago, there was a 1/4-cent tax that went to the university that got removed. So, people were paying 9.75. Maybe it's 9 7/8. Maybe it doesn't get to that magic 10 number. It's 9 7/8. To Jared's 3/8, but it's new allocation. To me, that's a lot simpler to stomach than telling the voters their rates are going to go up some astronomical, stupid number that we calculated here. And it wouldn't devastate, 30 years at $11 million, $11.2 million, 30, that's over $300 million you take out of the street fund for 3/8 of a cent penny. That's what I struggle with. I can't devastate the street fund because I'm worried about asking the voters for 3/8 something new. To Christina's point, most people round up to 10 already. And then we can focus on what the sewer rate can be. We can put a covenants there. So they know in the future, when we're all retired or long gone or are 10 feet under, the city is in good hands. I mean, I said it, but
You're going 10 feet down.
well,
4 extra
6 feet down, wherever it is, 6 feet under. But to me, that's the hard part I struggle with is asking the voters for 3/8 versus asking the voters to divert. That's the real question. Do we want to take $300 million out of the street fund for the next 30 years? Because, as I said, it's a math equation. If somebody's got an idea, I'm all ears. You got my email on the city website? Send it to me. Send it to the board if you got an idea. Show us the math. Because I've been sitting here trying to do the math for the past 3 or 4 weeks, trying to come up with a number. And that's the only thing I can come up with. That doesn't devastate every citizen, every single family, every young couple, young families, elderly citizens, all of us in the city of Fort Smith. I think that people outside can help pay for it, which will help drive and make it better for all of us.
I think if you build a campaign around that to explain to people your rates are either going to increase by this much or we can pass this tax and see what the voters can stomach. I personally would rather know in May than November so that we can pivot if we need to.
Where we are is, I've been taking a close look at this. We're at a point where we made a commitment to DOJ and EPA, and compliance with what we've told them will help avoid additional penalties, and we certainly want to meet the federal guidelines that they put in front of us. And then also it's time sensitive. What we'd have to do is very time sensitive. And delaying action could result in additional federal oversight, stricter penalties, and make the projects more expensive and more complicated to complete. So I urge the board to make a decision. I like Director Settle's idea, but that's something we could maybe go to the public with in November.
I'm willing to do it November or May, whatever the board thinks.
November or May.
Whatever the board, but I think reallocating the existing street tax is a must by the voters. And if we need more time to do a good campaign, as Dr. Cassava said next to me, and we can, the DOJ understands what we're trying to do, then I'm fine with that too. But if the board thinks we want to have a vote in November or in May, then we'll just go to the voters in May.
You know, this is good, the bottom line, this is good economic development. And the great things are happening. We just had an announcement about, I think, Bass Pro Shop is coming to town, Sissy's Log Cabin Jewelry is coming to town, Sam's Furniture is coming to town. And these things are going to continue as more and more industry and families find this an attractive place to live. So is there any other discussion?
Mayor, I guess what I'm going to do is I'll start it. I'll make a motion that we, next meeting, at the board meeting, we request to put on the agenda item that we ask for the reauthorization of the street and drainage tax for another 10 years and ask for the voters for 3/8 increase to make it a full penny for the consent decree work. I don't know how we do that. I don't know how we do that, Jeff.
Off of that, off of the streets tax?
No.
Or in addition?
So you're talking about a clean, what you want to have us consider next week, if I may, is a clean reauthorization of the existing streets tax.
Yeah.
And an additional percentage of new revenue for consent decree only, right? I mean,
Yes, to go with the 5/8 to make a full penny.
and I think, if I may, because of the somewhat inconclusive nature of the conversation, I mean, I think we need to have both things to consider next week, you know, the 1A, 1B, whatever.
Have both on it. Yeah, have a reallocation of the, so I put both on there. Give us 1A and 1B and let's choose.
Okay, and also, just for asking, we had on page 14 of your packet, the very first one is the reauthorization so that we could use the existing tax that was approved in 2022, so that we can use that 5/8 to help with debt service also.
I think that has to be on there.
I think everything in the packet tonight represents the necessary steps to reallocate and repurpose money from the street portion.
Right.
So we need to see that next week, and also what Director Settles.
Yeah, so this is maybe 1A, 1B, and there's a 1C, then we can choose if we're going to reallocate or ask for something new. Sorry about that, apologize.
Okay. I think I understand, but we'll clarify.
Okay. There'll be a second on my request.
Second.
Okay.
Thank you.
Would you also look at, like, how much money people would have to spend to equal $30 if they're paying the extra 3/8%?
Sure.
Okay. If there's no further discussion on number 3, I'm sure you reviewed the preliminary agenda for February 18th. This time we will go to the Citizens Forum.
We have 2 individuals, the first being Patrick McGuire. And I will have 5 minutes.
Okay. We'll fix it.
Thank you. Good evening. I have a suggestion that may improve your revenue situation. It complements what Mr. Settle has suggested. First, a little background. There's been many times in the past that I have wanted to go to downtown Garrison in the evening, have a meal, have some drinks, enjoy the nightlife, whatever there may be available down there. Honestly, I don't even know. But my problem is I live alone, and if I were to drive down there and have some amount of drinks, I may not be in a condition to drive home again. And that's always been a problem, so I've never made the trip downtown. And then I got to thinking, there's a bus that runs downtown. The Rogers Avenue bus runs all the way down to Garrison, and I live 2 blocks off of Rogers, and I'm thinking, terrific, I got a solution here. So I go to the website and I check, and yeah, sure enough, the bus runs down there, and the last one is at 6 o'clock. I wouldn't even want to go downtown until 7. Now, the moral of the story is if you were to extend the operating hours of the buses, at least on the weekends, to say 11, 12 o'clock, over time, you would get greater foot traffic down there. You would get greater customers for your restaurants and so forth, which then if you bring in your 2 to 3% restaurant tax, all of that will generate more revenue for the city. Won't be a lot, but the beauty of the plan is there's no additional capital investment. There's no requirement for any additional infrastructure. You have everything that's there. All you got to do is run the bus for another 3, 4 hours, 5 hours, whatever. Like I said, initially just on the weekends. If it catches on and you've got good traffic, you can extend it beyond that, either in terms of hours or in terms of days. But at least it will give you something to work with. So I just had that idea.
Okay.
On a related note, in looking at the website, the city website on buses and so forth, I looked at the fares and found out that an individual in my age group is entitled to a reduced fare, provided they have an FST reduced fare card. There's nowhere on the website that explains how or where to acquire such a card. I sent an email to I believe the director of the transit, got a response, an acknowledgement of my email. I asked for clarification on the matter and didn't get an answer. So I still don't know how I could get a reduced fare card.
I'm a Fort Smith Transit Commissioner. I can answer that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Anyway, that was my suggestion for what it's worth.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk?
Next, we have Dan Williams. Andy Postrick. Okay. That's it.
That's it? Okay, thank you, Matt. Thank you all for being here.
Motion to adjourn.